Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became a Soul Reaper captain and got married to Yoruichi, Rangiku, and Harribel. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox and the Flash Step. The air in Rukongai District 64, a place poetically named, Silent Petal, by a long-dead Soul Reaper who had clearly never set foot in it, tasted of ozone and old blood. Dust, kicked up from the unpaved streets, mingled with the thick, cloying spiritual pressure of a creature that had forgotten what it meant to be a soul. It was a monstrous thing, a hollow th. It had devoured others of its kind until its form became a perversion of nature, a writhing mass of chitinous limbs, mismatched masks, and a maw that roared with the agony of 100 consumed spirits. It had torn through the first responders from Squad 2's advance patrol like they were paper screens. Their broken bodies lay half buried in the rubble of what used to be a bustling marketplace. Now, the only movement was the panicked scramble of the district's inhabitants and the shuddering heave of the hollow as it raised a pincer-like claw to bring it down on a cowering family. The roaring claw never landed. It stopped, inches from the family, halted by a single sandaled foot. The impact, which should have shattered the earth, was absorbed with a quiet thud. The pressure of the blow rippled outwards, kicking up a perfect circle of dust, but the foot did not budge. Captain Naruto Uzumaki of Squad 11 didn't even seem to be straining. He held the monstrous limb in place with a casual sort of defiance, his other hand resting on the hilt of the sleek katana at his side. The pristine white of his captain's howry, emblazoned with the black diamond symbol for the 11th Division, was a stark contrast to the grimy chaos surrounding him. The only splash of color was the vibrant orange of his inner robes, a personal affectation that had scandalized the more traditional members of the Gote 13 when he had first been promoted. "All right, that's enough of that," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that cut through the hollow's screams. He glanced over his shoulder at the terrified family. "Go, now." They didn't need telling twice. They scrambled away, their feet finding purchase in the chaos. The hollow, enraged that its prey had been denied, bellowed and tried to crush him. Naruto simply shifted his weight, redirecting the immense force with a fluid motion that spoke of 1,000 battles. He pushed off, the hollow's own strength sending its limb careening into a nearby wall. He landed silently a dozen yards away, drawing his Zanpakuto, Kyubi no Kitsune, in a single, seamless motion. The blade was simple, unadorned, save for a small, nine-tailed fox sigil almost hidden on the crossed guard. Around him, his squad moved with practiced efficiency. They weren't the brutish thugs the 11th was once known for under Kenpachi Zaraki. They were still monsters in a fight, but they were his monsters now, disciplined, loyal, and terrifyingly effective. "Akaku, Yumachika, perimeter," Naruto ordered, his eyes never leaving the hollow. "Nothing gets in, no one else gets out. Get the civilians clear. Hozukimaru and Fuji Kujaku should be more than enough to handle any stragglers." Finally, a real fight. Akaku Madarami's voice was a joyous roar. The bald-headed third seat was already grinning, his own Zanpakuto slung over his shoulder. He slammed the butt of its sheath into the ground, and it split into its iconic three-sectioned staff. "You heard him, pretty boy. Let's clear the stage for the captain." Yumachika Yasugawa, the fifth seat, sighed dramatically, brushing a speck of dust from his immaculate uniform. "Honestly, Akaku, must you be so boorish? But he's right. This creature's spiritual pressure is simply hideous. It's an affront to beauty." With a flick of his wrist, his own sickle-bladed Zanpakuto was in his hand. The rest of the squad, a mix of grim-faced veterans and eager newcomers, fanned out, creating a barrier between the battle and the district's residential areas. They moved with a quiet competence that was the hallmark of Naruto's command. He hadn't just taken over Squad 11, he had reforged it. The hollow, recovering its balance, focused all its maddened attention on the lone figure who had thwarted it. It let out a piercing shriek, and a torrent of crackling crimson energy, a sero, blasted from its mouth, tearing a trench through the ground as it shot toward Naruto. Naruto didn't even try to block it. He vanished. One moment he was there. The next he was gone, the Sero blasting harmlessly through the space he had occupied. He reappeared above the creature, seemingly walking on air, his blade held in a reverse grip. The hollow's multiple eyes swiveled upwards, unable to track the sheer speed of his shunpo. He dropped, not like a falling stone, but like a striking hawk. The blade of Kyubi no Kitsune met the hollow's thick carapace, not with a clang of steel on armor, but with a searing hiss. Orange spiritual energy, wild and vibrant like a contained fire, flared along the edge of his sword. He carved a deep gouge into the monster's back, the wound sizzling as his unique ryutsu burned it from the inside. The hollow thrashed, swatting at him with its many limbs, but it was like trying to catch the wind. He was a blur of orange and black, his movements economical and precise. He flowed around its attacks, using the flat of his blade to parry, his open hand to redirect. It was a dance of deadly efficiency. He wasn't just fighting, he was dismantling his opponent piece by piece. He landed on the ground, skidding to a halt and kicking up a plume of dust. He hadn't even broken a sweat. "You're big, I'll give you that," he mused, a faint grin touching his lips. "But you're slow, and you've got way too many blind spots." As if to prove his point, he flickered again. 3 identical figures of him appeared, surrounding the hollow. The creature paused, confused, its simple mind unable to comprehend the cage bunshin technique, a relic of a past life that he had adapted into his Soul Reaper arts. It was a simple clone, with no real substance. But it was the perfect distraction. The hollow swiped at one clone, which dispersed in a puff of smoke. It lunged at another, with the same result. While it was occupied, the real Naruto was already moving in, his blade glowing with condensed power. "He's just toying with it now," a voice, smooth as silk and laced with amusement, commented from above. Naruto didn't need to look. He knew that voice better than his own. He glanced up at a nearby rooftop. Leaning against a dilapidated chimney, arms crossed and a predatory grin on her face, was Yoruichi Shihoin. She wore her usual black stealth ops gear, a stark contrast to his captain's whites, her golden eyes gleaming with mirth. "Shouldn't you be off doing something sneaky and noble-like?" Naruto called out, effortlessly sidestepping a scything limb. "And miss the show," Yoruichi purred, her long purple hair tied back in its signature ponytail. "Your form is getting a little sloppy, Naruto. You are eeled on your left foot for that last shunpo pivot. A half-second too slow. I could have taken your head off." "Funny," he shot back, spinning to deliver a powerful kick to the hollow's jointed leg, cracking its chitinous shell. "I seem to recall the last time we sparred, you were the one who ended up pinned." Her grin widened. "I let you win. It's good for your ego." The hollow, ignoring the conversation that was happening at its expense, let out another frustrated roar. This time, its entire body began to glow, spiritual energy gathering at an alarming rate. "Ah, it's going to blow, Yoruichi," I noted with the casual air of someone commenting on the weather. "That'll take out the whole district." "I know," Naruto said, his playful demeanor vanishing, replaced by a sharp focus. He took a deep breath, and his spiritual pressure, which had been a calm, steady river, erupted into a raging ocean. The very air grew thick and heavy. The ground beneath his feet cracked. The orange glow around his sword intensified, swirling like a miniature sun. "Getsuga Tensho?" Yoruichi asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in her voice. "My version," he replied. He raised his blade, the energy coalescing around it. But it wasn't the clean, crescent-shaped arc of Ichigo Kurisaki's famous attack. This was something wilder, less refined, but infinitely more potent. It was a maelstrom of raw power, a swirling vortex of his own unique spiritual energy, infused with the faint, feral echo of the nine-tailed fox that was the soul of his Zanpakuto. "Rasenga," he yelled, the name a nostalgic echo from another life. He brought the sword down. It wasn't a slash. He thrust the swirling vortex of energy forward. The attack shot across the ground, not cutting, but grinding everything in its path into dust. It struck the self-destructing hollow dead center. There was no grand explosion. There was only a moment of absolute silence as the hollow was utterly and completely obliterated, its form and energy consumed by the spiraling attack. The Rasenga continued for another 100 yards before dissipating, leaving behind a perfectly scoured trench in the earth. Silence descended upon the former marketplace. broken only by the distant sounds of the city. Naruto stood in the aftermath, his blade resting on his shoulder. He let out a slow breath, the immense pressure around him receding back to its calm state. Yoruichi leapt down from the rooftop, landing as silently as a cat beside him. She circled the crater left by his attack, poking at its edge with her toe. Rasenga, she repeated, testing the word. Still using names from your old life, are we? It's effective, I'll grant you. Messy, but effective. You really have no sense of subtlety. It gets the job done, he said, sheathing Kyuubi no Kitsune. And who needs subtlety when you've got overwhelming firepower? She laughed, a throaty, genuine sound. Spoken like a true captain of Squad 11. Kenpachi would be proud. She reached up and playfully flicked his nose. But you're smarter than he ever was. You waited for it to gather all its energy in one place. One shot, minimal collateral damage to the surrounding area. Very clever. I have my moments, he admitted with a shrug. Akaku and Yumachika returned, their expressions a mixture of awe and disappointment. Ah, it's over already, Captain. Akaku complained, his 3-section staff now back in its sheath form. I didn't even get to land a good hit. Your job was the perimeter, and you did it perfectly, Naruto said, his tone shifting back to that of a commanding officer. Status report. Civilian sector is secure, Yumachika reported smoothly. A few minor injuries from the initial panic, but no casualties since our arrival. The initial patrol team was not so lucky. We've recovered the bodies of all 6 members of Squad 2. Naruto's expression hardened. He walked over to where the fallen Soul Reapers lay, now covered by respectful white cloths. He knelt, ignoring the dust and grime, and placed a hand on each covered form for a moment. A silent prayer, a silent promise of remembrance. His squad watched, their own boisterous energy subdued. This was the other side of their captain. The one who celebrated their victories but never forgot the cost. See to it their return to the Seraite with full honors, he said quietly, rising to his feet. And say, ND a medic team to check on the family it was about to attack. Make sure they're all right. Yes, Captain, his officers chorused. As his squad went about their duties, cleaning up the battlefield and tending to the shaken residents. Yoruichi leaned against a half-shattered wall, watching him. You wear it well, she said softly. Wear what? The responsibility, the Haori, all of it. He looked at the white cloak over his shoulders. It's heavy sometimes. It's supposed to be, she replied. That's how you know you're doing it right. Later that night, the Seraite was a city of serene lights and silent, ordered streets. The chaos of the Rukongai felt a world away. On the highest roof of the Squad 11 barracks, a spot that offered an unparalleled, panoramic view of the Soul Society's heart. Naruto sat with his legs dangling over the edge. The sake bottle beside him was half empty. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze rustled the ends of his spiky blonde hair. He had shed the captain's Haori, leaving him in his black shihakusho and the familiar orange beneath. He stared out at the Sokyoku Hill in the distance, a silent monument to a battle that had changed the course of so many lives, including his own. The air beside him shimmered, and Yoruichi appeared, not with a shunpo, but with the quiet grace of a shadow detaching from the darkness. She held 2 cups in her hand. Brooding looks terrible on you, she said, settling down beside him with an easy familiarity. She took the sake bottle, inspected the label with a discerning eye, and poured for them both. Good stuff. Where'd you steal it from? Hiraku's private stash, Byakuya's, Naruto replied, a small smile finally breaking through his somber expression. He took the cup she offered. He owes me. I beat him at shogi last week. Yoruichi let out a snort of disbelief. You beat Byakuya Kuchiki at shogi. The man who probably calculates the spiritual particle alignment of his every move. Don't lie to me, Naruto. Okay. I let him think he was winning and then switched his pieces with clones when he wasn't looking, he admitted. She burst into laughter, the sound echoing softly in the night air. That's more like it. I knew you were a cheater. They drank in comfortable silence for a moment, their shoulders brushing against each other. It was an easy, unforced proximity, born of years of friendship that had slowly, inevitably, blossomed into something more. She had been one of the first to truly see him when he had arrived in the Soul Society, a lost soul with impossible power and a past that haunted him. She had trained him, challenged him, and pushed him, never letting him settle for anything less than his full potential. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" she asked, her voice losing its teasing edge. "The ones from Squad 2. He nodded, swirling the sake in his cup. "6 of them. One was a kid, probably not much older than I was when I first became a genin. He was stationed at the gate when I first came to the Seraite. Used to ask me for fighting tips." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. He shouldn't have been out there. That thing, it was beyond a standard patrol's capabilities. Intelligence should have caught it sooner. "You can't save everyone, Naruto," she said gently. "It's the one lesson every captain has to learn, usually the hard way." "Doesn't mean I have to like it," he muttered. He took a long drink of sake. "I spent my whole first life trying to bring one friend back from the darkness. I fought in a war that killed people I considered family. I came here hoping for, I don't know, a fresh start. But it's still the same, isn't it? People die, and we're the ones left to clean up the mess and file the reports." Yoruichi put her cup down and shifted, turning to face him fully. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, her grip firm and reassuring. "It's not the same," she insisted, her golden eyes serious. "Look out there." She gestured to the sprawling, peaceful city below them. "You're not just cleaning up messes. You're protecting this. You've built a home here. You have a squad that would follow you into the mouth of hell itself. You have me." He looked from her hand, which was still covering his, up to her face. The moonlight softened the sharp, predatory angles of her features, revealing a vulnerability she showed to no one else. In that moment, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely let surface. "I do." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was soft, not fiery or passionate, but full of a quiet understanding and a deep, unspoken affection. It was a kiss that tasted of sake and the cool night air, a moment of peace stolen in the heart of a warrior's world. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "Don't carry it all alone, you idiot," she whispered. "That's what I'm here for." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close against his side. She leaned into his warmth, and together they watched the lights of the Seraite twinkle below, two solitary figures finding solace in each other's presence. His silence that followed was no longer heavy with grief, but filled with a comfortable, shared strength. "You know," he said after a long while, a hint of his usual grin returning to his voice. "For a princess who ran away from her stuffy noble life, you give surprisingly good motivational speeches." She jabbed him in the ribs, but she didn't pull away. "Shut up and pour me some more of that stolen sake." Miles away, in the very center of the Seraite, stood the imposing structure of the 1st Division barracks. Deep within its halls, in the office of the Captain Commander, the atmosphere was far from serene. Shunsui Kyoraku, his signature pink haori draped over his shoulders and his straw hat tilted low over his eyes, stared at the report in his hand. The single sheet of parchment felt heavier than a block of granite. Across from him stood a pale, sweating Soul Reaper from the Department of Research and Development. The man was practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Are you certain about these readings?" Kyoraku asked, his voice low and deceptively casual. "The Mukan is shielded, sealed. Nothing should be detectable from down there, let alone this." "There is no mistake, Captain Commander." The researcher stammered, wringing his hands. "We triple-checked the instruments. We thought it was a malfunction at first. But the spiritual pressure reading is stable. It's vast, impossibly so. It makes Captain Zaraki's Ryutsu look like a flickering candle." Kyoraku fell silent, his fingers drumming a slow, thoughtful rhythm on his desk. He had felt many things in his long life. He had faced down traitors, monsters, and even gods. But this report sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. The pressure wasn't violent or malevolent. It was calm, perfectly, unnervingly orderly. It was the pressure of something ancient, something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. "The source," Kyoraku said, finally looking up, the shadow from his hat obscuring his eyes. "Can you pinpoint it?" "We can, sir," the researcher replied, swallowing hard. "It's emanating from the lowest level. The absolute bottom. From the area known only as the final prison. It was a place that existed more in legend than in fact, a level of the Mukan so deep and so heavily sealed that no one had been sent there since the original Gote 13 had been founded. A prison for a single entity. An entity that was never supposed to be disturbed. Hiraku dismissed the trembling researcher with a wave of his hand. Once the man had scrambled out of the room, the captain commander leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning in protest. He reached into his robes, pulling out his ever-present bottle of sake, and poured himself a generous cup. He took a long, slow drink, his gaze distant. The peace the Soul Society had enjoyed since the Quincy War suddenly felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, dark ocean. And something was beginning to stir in the depths. "Nanao-chan," he said quietly to the empty room. "I have a feeling things are about to get very troublesome." Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Lioness and the Leopard Queen. The single greatest enemy of peace, order, and sanity in the entire Soul Society was, in Rangiku Matsumoto's expert opinion, paperwork. It was a silent, insidious foe, a creeping tide of beige parchment that eaten to drown even the most resilient of souls. It offered no thrill of battle, no satisfying clash of steel, only the slow, agonizing death of 1,000 ink strokes. She was currently losing a war against it on her desk in the Squad 10 barracks. Reports from the Department of Research and Development, requisition forms for new training equipment, and patrol schedules were stacked in Prikaryu's towers that listed like drunken giants. If I have to read one more report on the spiritual particle density of warehouse dust, I'm going to release Heineka on this entire office, she muttered, Santa. MPing a document with far more force than was strictly necessary. The paperwork would probably just absorb the ash and become an even more formidable enemy, a dry, unimpressed voice stated from across the room. Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya, a prodigy in every sense of the word, sat behind his own impeccably organized desk, looking as if he'd been carved from ice in disapproval. For a boy who looked barely old enough to be in the Soul Reaper Academy, he possessed the weariness of a man 3 times his age, most of it, he would claim, induced by his lieutenant. "Don't give it ideas, Captain," Rangiku sighed, leaning back in her chair with a dramatic groan. "Can't we go do something interesting? Repel an invasion, fight a giant monster, anything. You just got back from a 3-day patrol," Hitsugaya countered, not looking up from his work. "And you spent most of it complaining about the lack of good sake in that district." A valid and serious complaint. Morale is important. He finally looked up, his turquoise eyes sharp and focused. He slid a single folder across his desk. "Fine. You want something interesting. Here." Rangiku's mood brightened instantly. She practically skipped to his desk and snatched up the folder. "A new mission. Is it dangerous? Exotic? Will there be handsome men in distress that I need to rescue?" "It's a joint investigation with Squad 11, he said, his tone flat. "A series of disappearances in the Seijun Highlands." Rangiku's excitement dimmed slightly. The Seijun Highlands was a collection of districts controlled by the old, traditionalist noble families. It was a beautiful, meticulously manicured part of the Soul Society, and about as exciting as watching paint dry. "Disappearances. Hollows. Unlikely. The area is heavily warded," Hitsugaya said, tapping a finger on his desk. 5 Soul Reapers have vanished over the past 2 months. All from different squads, all while on minor assignments in the area. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. They just disappear. He paused, his gaze intensifying. The mission was requested by the Omikami clan, who oversee that territory. They specifically requested assistance from Squad 11. Rangiku's finely tuned senses, honed by years of navigating Seraite politics as much as any battlefield, tingled with suspicion. They requested Squad 11. The old guard hates Naruto. They think he's a vulgar upstart with no respect for tradition. Why would they ask for him by name? Because it's a trap, Hitsugaya stated plainly. The Omikami clan was one of the loudest voices against Uzumaki's promotion. They see him as a threat to their established order. This investigation is a test. They either expect him to fail, making him look incompetent, or they've orchestrated something they believe he can't handle, hoping to remove him from the board entirely. A fierce, protective anger flared in Rangiku's chest. Naruto was a friend. He was one of the few people in the Gote 13 who saw her as more than just a pretty face with a powerful Zanpakuto. He saw her as a comrade, a professional, and he treated her with a respect that was both refreshing and deeply affecting. So they're sending me in to, what? Babysit him? She asked, a dangerous edge to her voice. No, Hitsugaya corrected. They're sending you because they know you're one of the most capable lieutenants in the Gote 13, despite your best efforts to hide it behind a mountain of sake bottles and frivolous complaints. It was the closest he would ever come to a direct compliment. Uzumaki is powerful, but his approach is as subtle as a sero to the face. You are not. Your instincts are sharp. This mission requires a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Go be the scalpel. A slow smile spread across Rangiku's face. Well, when you put it like that, Captain. She tucked the folder under her arm. I suppose I can go lend the big lug a hand. As she turned to leave, Hitsugaya added one last thing. Matsumoto, be careful. The old clans don't play by the same rules we do. Don't worry, Captain, she said with a wink over her shoulder. Neither do I. The air in the Seijun Highlands was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and wet stone. Manicured moss gardens and ancient, elegant estates lined the pathways. It was a world away from the gritty reality of the Rukongai. Naruto stood at the designated meeting point, a stone bridge arching over a tranquil koi pond. Looking profoundly out of place. His vibrant orange robes were a slash of defiant color against the muted greens and grays of the landscape. He wasn't alone. Akaku and Yumichika stood behind him, looking equally uncomfortable, like a pair of wolves forced to attend a tea ceremony. A small contingent of men in formal, dark kimonos stood opposite them. Their leader was a tall, severe-looking man with graying hair pulled back in a tight topknot and a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of granite. This was Kenshin Omikami, the patriarch of his clan and the overseer of this territory. Captain Uzumaki, Kenshin said, his voice as crisp and cold as the air. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We are, of course, deeply concerned about the safety of the Soul Reapers serving in our district. His tone suggested he was more concerned about the inconvenience. My squad is always ready to respond when Soul Reapers are in danger, Lord Omikami, Naruto replied. His voice level and devoid of any false deference. He projected an easy confidence that seemed to set the nobleman's teeth on edge. Indeed, Kenshin said, his eyes flicking over Urakaku's bald head and Yumichika's feathered eyelashes with disdain. Though I must confess, I had hoped for a more discreet assistance. Your squad's reputation for subtlety is not exactly sterling. Before Naruto could reply, the gentle chime of a bell and the sound of light footsteps announced a new arrival. Rangiku strolled onto the bridge, a picture of grace and effortless charm. Sorry I'm late, she said, her voice a cheerful melody. The directions were a little stuffy. She came to a halt beside Naruto, offering him a brilliant smile. Naruto, it's been too long. Trying to bring some color to this dreary place, are we? Rangiku, he greeted her, his face breaking into a genuine, warm grin. Just trying to keep up with you. Figured you could use some competent help on this one. Their easy banter, the familiar way she lightly bumped her shoulder against his, seemed to deepen the scowl on Kenshin's face. Lieutenant Matsumoto, Kenshin said, his voice laced with condescension. While your presence is noted, I was under the impression we were getting the Gote 13's finest investigators, not its most famed socialites. The air temperature dropped several degrees. Akaku's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword. But Naruto was faster. He took a half step forward, subtly placing himself between Kenshin and Rangiku. His smile was gone, replaced by an unnervingly calm intensity. Lord Omikami, Naruto said, his voice dangerously soft. Lieutenant Matsumoto's record speaks for itself. She is one of the sharpest Soul Reapers I know. If you have a problem with my choice of personnel for this investigation, then you can take it up with the Captain Commander. Otherwise, I suggest you let us do the jobs you asked us here for. Am I clear? The sheer, unyielding pressure that radiated from Naruto in that moment was staggering. It wasn't the wild, explosive power he used in a fight. It was a focused, controlled wave of absolute authority. Kenshin Omikami, for all his noble breeding, visibly flinched. He held Naruto's gaze for a second, then gave a stiff, jerky nod. Perfectly, he bit out. Rangiku watched the exchange, a slow warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't the first time he had stood up for her, but it never failed to affect her. She gave him a small, grateful smile when Kenshin's attention was diverted. He responded with a subtle wink. Right then, Naruto said, his cheerful demeanor returning as if a switch had been flipped. Let's get to it. Rangiku, you have the initial reports. What are we looking at? The investigation began. Kenshin and his men escorted them. Their presence a constant, silent judgment. They visited the last known locations of the 5 missing Soul Reapers, a quiet tea house, a secluded training dojo, a records library. On the surface, everything was pristine, too pristine. There's nothing here, Akaku grumbled after an hour of searching the library. No lingering spiritual pressure, no sign of a fight. It's like they just vanished into thin air. That's what's bothering me, Rangiku said, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed the case files again. She held up 2 reports. Look, the 3rd victim, a member of Squad 4, disappeared from the tea house at noon. The 4th, from Squad 6, vanished from this library at midnight on the same day. But the Omikami clan's report claims both. Locations were sealed for a full day for investigation immediately after each disappearance was reported. So how did the second disappearance happen in a sealed-off location? Naruto, who had been kneeling with his eyes closed, his hand pressed against the floorboards, opened his eyes. Because it wasn't sealed off. Not completely. He looked up, his gaze distant. I can feel it. It's incredibly faint, almost gone completely. But there's a trace of something wrong. Under the floor. While Akaku and Yumichika began prying up the floorboards, Kenshin protested vehemently. This is an ancestral library. You cannot simply vandalize it based on a whim. We're investigating the disappearance of 5 Soul Reapers, Naruto shot back, not even bothering to look at him. A few floorboards are a small price to pay. Beneath the wood, they found it. A complex, geometric pattern etched into the stone foundation. It was Kido, but a dark, twisted version of it, pulsing with a faint, corrupt energy. A sacrificial array, Yumichika breathed, his usual vanity replaced by a look of disgust. But it's dormant, and it feels hungry. As they examined the array, a black cat with golden eyes suddenly leapt down from a high shelf. Startling everyone except Naruto, the cat trotted over to him and rubbed against his leg, purring. Find anything, Yoruichi? Naruto asked, scratching the cat behind the ears. The cat looked up at him and gave a distinct meow. What in the? Kenshin began, utterly bewildered. She says there are more of these arrays, Naruto translated casually. Hidden under Key S. Spiritual nexus points throughout the district. All connected. It's not just a trap for Soul Reapers. It's a network. Kenshin's face had gone pale. This was spiraling far beyond his control. He had intended to present Naruto with a simple, unsolvable mystery to humiliate him. He had not anticipated this level of methodical, almost supernatural competence. The arrays formed a pattern, a massive CIR. Clee encompassing the central Omikami estate. And at its heart, Naruto's sensory abilities picked up a concentration of the same corrupt energy, stronger and more active than the dormant runes. It's coming from your house, Lord Omikami. Naruto said, his eyes locking onto the nobleman's. I think it's time you gave us a tour. The hidden chamber was deep beneath the main estate, in a place of cold stone and oppressive silence. The air was thick with the tang of forbidden Kido. In the center of the room was a massive, glowing array, far larger and more intricate than the others. And standing before it, his hands raised as if in prayer, was Kenshin Omikami. So it was you all along, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the chamber. He, Rangiku, Akaku, and Yumichika stood in the doorway, their weapons drawn. Kenshin's men were nowhere to be seen. Kenshin turned slowly, and the face that met them was not that of a stiff nobleman, but of a fervent zealot. His eyes burned with a wild, ecstatic light. It was, he confessed without a hint of shame. Those 5 souls were a necessary sacrifice. An offering. A key to open the door for the one who will cleanse this stagnant world. Cleanse it, Rangiku demanded, her hand tightening on Hineka's hilt. You murdered 5 of our own for some lunatic fantasy. It is no fantasy, Kenshin roared, his composure cracking completely. The Gote 13 has grown weak, complacent. It allows outsiders, beasts, and commoners to walk its hallowed halls. His eyes blazed at Naruto. It promotes a monster like you to the rank of captain. The balance has been broken. But he will restore it. He will bring true order, a world of perfect silence and unity where there is no conflict, no pain, no choice. Only peace. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Perfect order. Silence. It was the same philosophy he had heard in the voice from the Muken. This wasn't just a political plot. This was something far more dangerous. I'm going to have to stop you there, Naruto said, taking a step forward. Kenshin laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You cannot. The ritual is already underway. He slammed his palm onto the central rune of the array. The entire room flared with blinding light, and the stone walls around them began to shift and reform. Thick walls of solidified Kido shot up, separating them. Captain, Akaku yelled, as a wall slammed down between him and Naruto. Naruto found himself in a confined space with Kenshin, while Rangiku was trapped in an adjacent chamber, facing two massive Kido constructs, armored golems animated by the sacrificial array. You deal with the pets. Lieutenant Matsumoto, Kenshin cackled from the other side of the barrier. While I offer your captain as the final, glorious sacrifice. In his chamber, Kenshin launched a barrage of high-level binding spells at Naruto. Chains of dark energy shot from the walls, seeking to ensnare him. But Naruto moved like lightning, a blur of orange and black, weaving between the chains, stone floor cracking under the force of his shunpo. Meanwhile, Rangiku faced the golems. They were slow but incredibly powerful, their fists striking the walls with enough force to shake the entire underground complex. A direct hit would be lethal. All right, boys, let's dance, she said, a grim smile on her face. Scatter. Hineka. Her blade dissolved into a massive cloud of razor-sharp ash. It was a perfect weapon for this situation. The golems swung wildly, their attacks useless against the swirling cloud. Rangiku, her mind connected to every single particle of ash, directed the storm. It wasn't about brute force. It was about precision. She sent streams of ash into the delicate magical joints of the constructs, grinding them down, severing the Kido that held them together. Naruto, on his side, was pressing Kenshin relentlessly. The nobleman was a master of Kido, but Naruto's pure speed and unpredictable fighting style were too much for him. You fight like a beast. No grace, no form. Kenshin spat, erecting a powerful shield Kido. Works for me, Naruto grunted, appearing directly behind him. He didn't use his sword. He drove the palm of his hand into Kenshin's back. A small, controlled spiral of his Rasengan energy pulsed outwards, shattering the nobleman's intricate Kido control and sending him crashing to the floor, gasping and powerless. At the same moment, Rangiku Fu, ND the core runes powering her opponents. With a final, focused surge, she sent her ash slicing through them. The golems crumbled into dust. The Kido walls dissolved. Rangiku stood, breathing heavily but victorious. Amidst a cloud of slowly settling ash, she looked over at Naruto, who had Kenshin pinned under his foot. Their eyes met across the ruined chamber, and a silent understanding passed between them. They were a good team. Kenshin, defeated, looked up at Naruto with eyes full of delirious joy. You can kill me, he wheezed. But it's too late. The first bell has been rung. The master is waking. He will assimilate you all into his perfect peace. You will be saved. Before he could say more, Yumachika appeared behind him, using the hilt of his Zanpakuto to knock the fanatic unconscious. The aftermath was politically messy. But the immediate threat was over. The Omikami clan was disgraced, its plot to frame Naruto exposed as a far more sinister conspiracy. Central 46 was in an uproar. But for Naruto and Rangiku, the day's work was done. That evening, they found themselves in a small, quiet bar in one of the less trafficked districts, the kind of place where captains and loot Nance could drink without being bothered. They were seated at a worn wooden table in a corner booth. A third figure was already there, sipping on a saucer of milk, having slipped in unnoticed by anyone else. Took you too long enough, Yoruichi said, transforming from her cat form into her human one in a swirl of black cloth, now dressed in a simple tunic and pants. I was getting thirsty. Some of us have to work for a living. Princess, Rangiku teased, sliding into the booth next to her. Can't all just sneak around on rooftops all day. My, sneaking around, is what confirmed the Keto network was centered on the estate. Yoruichi shot back with a smirk. You're welcome, by the way. Naruto sat opposite them, looking more relaxed than he had all day. He ordered a large bottle of top-shelf sake and 3 cups. He said his master was waking up, Naruto said, his expression turning serious as he poured the drinks. The same kind of language the voice in the Mukan used. This is bigger than just one crazy noble clan. It's a cult, Yoruichi surmised, taking a sip of her sake. One that's been festering in the shadows of the Seraite for a long time, it seems. And Kenshin's ran. Tea about restoring order, Rangiku added, a thoughtful frown on her face. It's a fanaticism that runs deeper than just politics. She looked at Naruto, her gaze soft. Thank you, by the way, for what you said to him on the bridge. He's an ass, Naruto said with a simple shrug. And he was wrong. I'd be an idiot not to have you watching my back. Yoruichi watched the two of them, a knowing glint in her golden eyes. You two do make a good team. All that flirting and fighting. It's quite the show. Rangiku laughed, her cheeks flushing slightly. Oh, please, don't act like you're not the one who enjoys watching him fight the most. Yoruichi, I've seen you perched on rooftops like a lovesick gargoyle. I'm observing his technique for weaknesses, Yoruichi countered smoothly, though the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. Naruto just grinned, leaning back and enjoying the banter. In a world of political traps, ancient threats, and the constant weight of command, moments like this were what he fought for. Sitting here, between the fierce, brilliant noble who saw his potential and the sharp, courageous lieutenant who had his back, he felt a sense of belonging that was more potent than any sake. The world was growing darker, the whispers of a forgotten god echoing in the foundations of their home. But in this small circle of light, with these two incredible women by his side, he felt ready to face whatever was coming. He raised his cup to unlikely teams and political messes. Yoruichi and Rangiku raised their cups to meet his. To putting arrogant nobles in their place, Yoruichi added. To handsome captains who know how to stand up for a girl, Rangiku finished, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Naruto. They drank, their laughter filling the quiet corner of the bar, a small, defiant bastion of warmth against the encroaching cold. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Shark in the Desert. The sky over the Seraite was, by its very nature, a construct of serene predictability. It was a ceiling of flawless, unchanging blue, a placid ocean of reishi that offered comfort and order. That is why the scream was so offensive. It was not a sound, but a tearing, a violent rending of reality itself. High above the central districts, the perfect blue fractured. A jagged, black line appeared, widening with the sound of grinding teeth and splintering bone. It was a garganta, a portal to the desolate sands of Hueco Mundo, and it was opening with a raw, uncontrolled violence that spoke of desperation, not conquest. From the inky blackness, 4 figures fell. They were not an invading army. They were refugees, tumbling through the sky in a tangled mess of limbs and torn white uniforms. The leader, a tall, regal woman with tanned skin, blonde hair, and a fragment of a hollow mask covering the lower half of her face, was clearly wounded. Blood, dark against her white hakama, streamed from a deep gash in her side. She twisted in midair, her movements still imbued with a fierce grace, and managed to catch her 3 subordinates, shielding them from the brunt of the impact as they crashed onto the tiled rooftops of a government building. The impact sent a shockwave of shattered tiles and spiritual pressure across the Seraite. Alarms, silent for years, blared to life. Within seconds, the area was a blur of black and white as Soul Reapers arrived via Shunpo, their blades already drawn. The woman, Harribel, the former Tercera Espada, pushed herself to her knees, her breathing ragged. Her Zanpakuto, a broad, hollow-hilted blade, was held tightly in her hand. Around her, her Fracken, the fiery Apache, the powerful Mila Rose, and the cynical Sung Sun, scrambled to their feet, forming a protective triangle around their queen. They were battered, exhausted, their eyes burned with defiant loyalty. Stand down, Arankar, a voice commanded. Captain Soy Fawn of Squad 2 was the first of the captains to arrive, her small frame perched on a nearby rooftop, emanating an aura of pure Cold killing intent. Her lieutenant, Marekio Omaeda, stood panting several feet behind her, having failed to keep pace. You have invaded the Seraite. Surrender for immediate execution. Harribel didn't respond. Her piercing green eyes were fixed on the still open Garganta. She was not the aggressor here. She was the prey. As if on cue, another figure emerged from the portal. He was a tall, skeletal Arankar with dead, empty eyes and a mask fragment that resembled a crown of thorns. He floated down, a cruel smirk on his face, his spiritual pressure a chilling void of nihilistic power. Behind him, a dozen more Arankar, their forms twisted and their energy reeking of madness, followed. There you are, my queen, the skeletal Arankar crooned, his voice dripping with mockery. There is nowhere left for you to run. Lord Aizen's dream of evolution is dead. There is only the release of oblivion. The perfect nothingness. Surrender your followers to us. Let them be consumed and join the true emptiness. Quote, never, Grants, Harribel growled, the single word a vow. She pushed herself to her feet, stumbling slightly, and raised her blade. I will not let you sacrifice them for your insane philosophy. Then you will all die here, under this false sky, Grants replied with a shrug. He raised a hand, and a sero the color of pitch-black oil began to form. Soy Fawn clicked her tongue in annoyance. A squabble between hollows. How utterly tedious. Destroy them all. She prepared to release her Shikai. But the sero never fired. And Soy Fawn's command was never followed. A flash of orange and black materialized between the two Arankar factions, right in the middle of the tense standoff. Naruto Uzumaki landed silently on the rooftop, his back to Harribel and her Fracken. His gaze fixed on the newcomers. His captain's Haori billowed around him. He hadn't even drawn his sword. This is a restricted airspace, Naruto announced, his voice casual but carrying an unmistakable undertone of command. And you all are way over the posted speed limit. I'm going to have to ask you to turn around and leave. Grants paused, his sero dissipating. He tilted his head, studying Naruto with cold curiosity. A Soul Reaper captain, Zaraki. No, your pressure is different. Warmer. More alive. It makes me sick. I get that a lot, Naruto said with a grin. Now, about my offer. It's a limited time deal. Soy Fawn appeared at Naruto's side, her face a mask of fury. Uzumaki. What is the meaning of this? Stand aside. These are enemies. They must be purged. One of them is asking for a fight. The other is protecting her people, Naruto replied, his eyes never leaving Grants. Bit of a difference, don't you think? There is no difference, she snapped. They are all hollows. By now, more captains had arrived. Byakuya Kuchiki stood with his usual aristocratic impassivity. Shunsui Kyoraku, his hat tilted low, watched with a keen, analytical eye. Rangiku Matsumoto appeared a moment later, her expression immediately hardening with concern as she took in the scene. She is a former Espada, Byakuya stated, his voice calm and measured. An enemy combatant who participated in the war against the Soul Society. The law is clear. She and her subordinates are to be eliminated. The war's over, Byakuya, Naruto countered, still not looking back. And right now, she's the one being attacked. My duty is to protect the Seraite. That includes stopping fights from breaking out on our rooftops, no matter who started them. Behind him, Harribel watched, her expression a mixture of confusion and deep suspicion. She had expected an immediate, merciless assault from the Soul Reapers. Instead, this bizarre, orange-clad captain was defending her. No, not defending her. He was controlling the situation. There was a crucial difference. Enough talk, Grants sighed, clearly bored. If you will not stand aside, Captain, you will be the first to be erased. He and his followers lunged. It was a chaotic, multi-pronged assault of seros, sword strikes, and sonito flickers. Naruto didn't move an inch. Instead, 9 ethereal tails, made of pure, golden-orange spirit energy, erupted from his lower back. They moved with a life of their own, a whirlwind of shimmering power. One tail whipped out and casually swatted a sero out of the sky. 2 more solidified into sharp, blade-like points, parrying the sword strikes of 2 attacking Arankar with contemptuous ease. Another 4 moved like massive, flexible fists, slamming into the charging enemies and sending them hurtling back toward the Garganta. It was a perfect, 360-degree defense, executed without a single wasted motion. The entire exchange took less than a second. Grant and his forces were repelled, thrown back in disarray, not by a frantic defense, but by an overwhelming display of effortless power. Naruto hadn't even moved his hands from his pockets. "Last chance," he said, his smile gone. "Get out." Grant stared, his nihilistic confidence finally cracking. The sheer density and control of the spiritual pressure Naruto was emitting was on a level he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just raw power, it was a life force, so vibrant and potent that it felt like anathema to his own empty existence. "This is not over," Grant hissed, before he and his followers retreated back into the blackness of the Garganta, which snapped shut behind them, leaving an unnerving silence. The standoff, however, was far from over. Now, all attention, from the captains, the lieutenants, the newly arrived squads of Soul Reapers, was focused on the four Arrancar and the man who stood before them like a shield. "Now that the trash is taken care of," Soi Fan said, her voice dangerously low, "stand aside, Uzumaki." "No," Naruto said simply. He finally turned, his gaze falling on Harribel for the first time. He met her wary, piercing green eyes. He didn't see a monster. He saw a queen, wounded and cornered, but unbroken. He saw the way she stood in front of her Fracken, the way her grip on her sword was the only thing keeping her on her feet. He saw a leader. "I'm not going to let you execute them." An uproar went through the assembled Soul Reapers. Byakuya's hand went to the hilt of Senbon Sakura. "This is an act of treason, Captain Uzumaki." "Is it?" a calm voice interjected. Captain Commander Kiraku stepped forward, his lazy demeanor gone, replaced by the quiet authority of his station. He looked from Naruto to Harribel, his gaze unreadable. "Explain yourself, Captain Uzumaki. Why do you defend our enemy?" "Because the situation has changed," Naruto said, addressing Kiraku but speaking loud enough for all to hear. "We have a new threat." You heard him. He wasn't interested in conquest. He was talking about oblivion, emptiness. "We just spent years fighting a war against a man who wanted to reshape the world. This is something else, something worse." He gestured behind him with his thumb. "She was fighting him. She and her people are on the run. They came here not to attack, but to escape. The enemy of my enemy is a potential source of information at worst, and a potential ally at best. Executing her now would be stupid. It would be a waste. An alliance with Arrancar is unthinkable." A nobleman from Central 46, who had just arrived, sputtered in outrage. Yoruichi, who had appeared silently beside Kiraku, spoke up. "Is it more unthinkable than fighting a war on two fronts, against an enemy we know nothing about? Naruto's logic is sound. Pragmatism must outweigh prejudice if we are to survive." Rangiku stepped forward, placing herself at Naruto's side, a clear and public declaration of her support. "Captain Commander," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "our duty is to protect the Soul Society. If that means offering asylum to a former enemy to gain an advantage against a future one, then that is our duty. What is law, if not a tool to ensure the safety of our home?" Harribel watched this all unfold, her mind reeling. She had been prepared to die fighting. She had not been prepared for a debate over her strategic value. She looked at the orange-clad captain. He spoke of her as an asset, a piece on a strategic board, but his eyes told a different story. They held a look of understanding. Naruto took a few steps toward her, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. Her Fracken tensed, but Harribel held up a hand to stop them. "Cheer Harribel," Naruto said, his voice quiet, for her alone. "I know who you are. I know you fought for Aizen. But I also know you fought to protect your followers. That's what you're doing now." She remained silent, her gaze distrustful. "I'm not offering you pity," he continued, his tone direct and respectful. "I'm offering you a choice. A deal. You and your people are wounded, hunted. You have nowhere else to go. I'm offering you sanctuary, a place to rest, to heal. Here, in the Seraite, under my personal watch." Apache let out a disbelieving snort. "Sanctuary. With you, your Soul Reapers. You'd cut our throats the moment we closed our eyes. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead already," Naruto stated plainly, his gaze unwavering. "My squad's barracks are large. You'll be given your own quarters, food, medical attention. You will be treated as guests, not prisoners. In return, I want information. Everything you know about this Grants and his followers. And when the time comes, I expect you and your people to fight alongside us against him." He was not talking down to her. He was speaking to her as an equal, a fellow leader. He was offering her a chance to save her people and reclaim her honor. She studied him, searching for the trick, the hidden angle. She saw none, only a strange, unwavering sincerity. She saw the women who flanked him, the dark-skinned noble and the fiery-haired lieutenant, and the absolute trust they had in him. She was a queen without a throne, a protector with nothing left to protect but 3 loyal souls. Her pride warred with her pragmatism. But when she looked at the exhausted, fearful faces of Apache, Mila Rose, and Sung Sun, the choice became clear. "What guarantee do we have that you will honor this agreement?" she asked, her voice raspy. Naruto smiled, a small, confident grin. "You have my word, and around here, that's worth more than any law." He extended a hand. It was a monumental, unprecedented gesture. A Soul Reaper captain, offering a hand of alliance to an Arankar Espada in the heart of the Seraite. Soi Fan looked ready to spontaneously combust. Byakuya's stoicism was strained to its absolute limit. After a long, tense moment, Harribel looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out and grasped his forearm. Her grip was strong, despite her injuries. "We accept your terms," she said. Hiraku let out a long, slow sigh, as if a great weight had just settled onto his shoulders. He tipped his hat back, a weary smile on his face. "Well, Nanao-chan is going to have a heart attack from the sheer volume of paperwork this is going to generate," he said to no one in particular. Then, he raised his voice. "The decision is made. Cheer Harribel and her subordinates are granted temporary asylum. They will be placed under the exclusive jurisdiction and responsibility of Squad 11 and its captain, Naruto Uzumaki. This matter is now closed." He turned and vanished in a swirl of shunpo before anyone could argue further, leaving a stunned and divided crowd of Soul Reapers in his wake. Later, in the sprawling barracks of Squad 11, a section of the guest quarters had been cleared out. It was clean, spacious, and blessedly quiet. Harribel sat on the edge of a bed as a medic from Squad 4, working under Naruto's direct and watchful eye. Finished applying the final bandages to her side, her Fracken stood nearby, armed and suspicious, watching every move the Soul Reaper medic made. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Rangiku stood beside him, holding a tray with a teapot and 4 cups. "Your people will be fed and housed," Naruto said. "And no one will bother you. You have my promise." Harribel tested her bandages, her movements stiff. She looked around the room, then at him. "Why?" she asked, the single word carrying the weight of all her confusion. "Why would you take such a risk?" "For us. Because a storm is coming," Naruto said, his expression serious. "Bigger than Aizen, bigger than the Quincy. I can feel it, and when it hits, the titles of Soul Reaper and Arankar won't mean a damn thing. All that will matter is who is standing with you, and who is standing against you. I'd rather have a queen who fights for her people on my side." He pushed off the wall and walked over. Rangiku followed, placing the tray on a small table. She poured a cup of steaming tea and offered it to Harribel. The Arankar hesitated, then accepted it. The warmth of the cup seemed to seep into her cold hands. "Get some rest, Harribel," Naruto said, turning to leave. "We'll talk strategy when you're healed." He paused at the door and looked back, his gaze softening for a moment. "Welcome to the Seraite." He and Rangiku departed, leaving the 4 Arankar alone in their new, bewildering sanctuary. Sung Sun was the first to speak, her voice dripping with her usual sarcasm. "Well, this is surreal. I never thought I'd see the day we were drinking tea provided by Soul Reapers." "He's strange," Apache grumbled, though her fiery demeanor was dampened by exhaustion. "But he's strong, incredibly strong. He stopped all of Grants's men without even trying." Harribel said nothing. She stared into the amber liquid of her tea, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had come to the Seraite expecting a final, bloody battle. Instead, she had found an offer, a chance. She thought of the captain's eyes, clear and unwavering. He had not looked at her with hatred, or pity, or lust. He had looked at her with respect. In the desolate, dog-eat-dog world of Hueco Mundo, respect was a currency more valuable than power itself. For the first time in a very long time, Tear Harribel, the shark queen of a dead desert, allowed herself a flicker of something she had thought long extinguished, hope. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Forgotten God. The integration of the Arankar into the Squad 11 barracks was less of a smooth transition and more of a controlled collision. Naruto's orders were absolute. They were to be treated as guests, and his squad, for all their rough edges, were fiercely loyal. But loyalty didn't erase decades of ingrained animosity between Soul Reaper and Hollow. The air in the guest wing was thick with a tense, simmering silence. The Arankar kept to themselves, shadows of white in a world of black. And the Soul Reapers gave their quarters a wide, respectful berth. Rangiku found Tear Harribel in the squad's largest training dojo. The Arankar queen was not resting. Dressed in a simple white training gi provided by the squad, her wounds freshly bandaged, she moved through a series of slow, deliberate katas. Her movements were fluid and powerful, a predator's grace that even her injuries could not diminish. Her fracken watched from the edge of the dojo, their vigilance unwavering. Rangiku leaned against the doorframe, a tray laden with medical supplies and nutritional supplements from Squad 4 held in her hands. She didn't announce herself, simply watched for a moment. She saw the minute tremor in Harribel's stance, the slight hitch in her breath as she extended her wounded side. She was pushing herself, refusing to show weakness even in the relative safety of their sanctuary. Rangiku understood that impulse perfectly. "If you tear those stitches, you know Hana will have my head," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the dojo. "And trust me, you don't want to be on her bad side." Harribel stopped, her body frozen mid-strike. She turned her head slowly, her green eyes analytical and cold. "My recovery is my own concern, Lieutenant Matsumoto. Not when you're under my captain's protection, it's not," Rangiku countered, walking into the dojo with an easy sway of her hips. She placed the tray down on a wooden bench. "He has a nasty habit of taking responsibility for everyone and everything. If his honored guest collapses from overexertion, he'll blame himself. It's annoying. So, for my sake, please don't be annoying." Apache bristled at the familiar tone. "Watch how you speak to Lady Harribel." Harribel raised a hand, silencing her. She relaxed her stance and walked toward Rangiku, her gaze never wavering. "Your captain is an anomaly. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about him," Rangiku replied with a wry smile. She picked up a small jar from the tray. "This is a salve from Squad 4. It'll speed up the healing and reduce the scarring." She held it out. "Unless you prefer having scars. Some people find them distinguished. I just find they mess with the line of a good kimono." Harribel looked at the outstretched hand, then back at Rangiku's face. She saw no pity, no condescension. She saw a frank, professional concern, delivered with a disarming layer of flippancy. It was a language of strength she understood. She took the jar. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "Don't mention it," Rangiku said. Turning to leave, she paused at the door. "He took a huge risk for you. The old guard is furious. There are whispers of a censure vote in Central 46. "I am aware," Harribel stated. "I do not understand why he did it." "Because he's an idiot," Rangiku said, a fond, exasperated warmth in her voice that completely contradicted her words. "He sees a person in trouble, and he helps. He doesn't care if they're a Soul Reaper, a human, or an Arankar. He just sees someone who needs a hand." She looked over her shoulder, a serious glint in her blue eyes. "Don't mistake his kindness for weakness, Harribel. It's the most dangerous thing about him." She walked away, leaving the Arankar queen to ponder her words. Harribel looked down at the salve in her hand. Kindness as a weapon. It was indeed an anomalous concept. A reconnaissance mission. Into the Mukan. Naruto's voice was flat, the question a confirmation rather than an inquiry. He stood in the captain commander's office. The shoji screens closed, casting the room in a soft, dim light. Yoruichi stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Shunsui Kyoraku sat behind his desk, his usual lazy demeanor gone. The pink haori was folded neatly on a nearby chair, and his sake bottle was nowhere in sight. He looked every inch the military commander he was. Not just into it. To the very bottom, Hiraku confirmed, sliding a thin folder across the desk. It contained only a single sheet of parchment, covered in the frantic scrawls of the researchers from the DR&D. The energy readings haven't fluctuated. It's a constant, massive pressure, calm and orderly. The fanatic, Omikami, was clearly one of its followers. We are no longer dealing with a political dissident. We are dealing with occult worshipping whatever is sealed down there. And you want us to go knock on its door? Yoruichi asked, her voice laced with dry sarcasm. What should we bring? A fruit basket. You will bring your skills in stealth and speed. Hiraku replied, his gaze serious. This is not an engagement. I repeat, you are not to engage. Your mission is to infiltrate the lowest level, identify the source of the pressure. Assess the state of the seal containing it, and get out. I need to know what we're facing. Why us? Naruto asked, though he already knew the answer. Because the two of you are the fastest soul reapers in the Gote 13. Hiraku stated, no one else could get to the bottom and back without triggering every alarm in the place. This needs to be quiet. No one outside of this room, and a few trusted individuals, is to know about this mission. If word gets out that the final seal is being investigated, it would cause a panic I cannot afford right now, especially with the politica. Situation surrounding your new house guests. Naruto and Yoruichi exchanged a look. It was a look that passed between them without a word, a seamless communication of shared understanding and absolute trust. A mission into the deepest, most dangerous prison in existence. For anyone else, it would be a death sentence. For them, it was Tuesday. When do we leave? Naruto asked. Immediately, Hiraku replied. The entrance has already been cleared for you. Go, and come back. The entrance to the Mukan was not a gate or a door, but a void. A patch of absolute blackness in a sterile, white chamber. Guarded by two stoic members of the Onmitsukido. They offered Naruto and Yoruichi solemn nods as they approached. The pressure gets strange, the deeper you go, Yoruichi murmured, her senses on high alert. It's not just heavy. It tries to press your soul into a specific shape. Tries to organize you. I feel it, Naruto replied, his own spiritual senses extending into the darkness. It's like being in a library where all the books are being forced onto one shelf. They stepped through the void together, and the world fell away. There was no sense of falling, only of descending. The air, if it could be called that, was thick and still. There was no light, no sound, nothing but an infinite, crushing blackness. The spiritual pressure was a physical force, a constant weight that sought to grind down individuality. To smooth over the rough edges of a soul until it was uniform and silent. They moved as one, a synchronized blur of shunpo. Their footsteps made no sound in the oppressive silence. They were two ghosts falling through an endless night. They passed through levels of the prison that held beings of unimaginable power, their sealed presences feeling like distant, caged stars in the overwhelming darkness. But they didn't slow. Their destination was far below. The journey felt like it took an eternity. Time had no meaning here. Finally, they felt a shift. They broke through a final, metaphysical barrier and landed silently on solid ground. They were in a cavern. A space so vast it felt like a skyless world unto itself. The crushing pressure was at its peak here, a palpable presence that made the air hum. And in the center of the cavern, they saw it. It was not a gate. It was not a prison cell. It was a sphere of intricate, interlocking light and shadow, a thous and Kido seals woven together into a single, massive construct the size of a mountain. It was beautiful and terrifying, a masterpiece of ancient power. And it was failing. Faint, hairline cracks webbed its surface. From these cracks, the serene, orderly pressure leaked out like a slow, inexorable tide. This was the source, the final prison. By the Soul King, Yoruichi breathed, her usual composure shaken. The amount of power it must have taken to build this, and the amount of power it must be holding back. Naruto didn't answer. He was staring at the seal, his hand resting on the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Something was wrong. The silence was too perfect. As they took a step closer, the cavern floor in front of them began to shift. The very stone seemed to fold in on itself, reforming with silent, geometric precision. 3 figures rose from the ground. They were not hollows, not soul reapers. They were constructs, crystalline and vaguely humanoid, their forms made of pure, solidified Kido. They had no faces, no features. Only a smooth, perfect symmetry. They radiated the same unnerving, orderly pressure as the seal itself. Defenses are active, Naruto stated, his voice tight. Let's see what they can do, Yoruichi said, dropping into a low combat stance. One of the constructs glided forward, its movement unnaturally smooth. It raised a hand, not to strike, but simply presenting its open palm. Yoruichi moved to intercept it, a blur of motion. But as she entered a 10-foot radius of the creature, her shunpo faltered. It felt as if she were trying to run through thick molasses. What is this? She grunted, pushing against the unseen force. It's not a binding spell. It's enforcing stillness, Naruto realized, his eyes wide. It's not attacking you. It's attacking your motion. The construct took another step. The closer it got, the slower Yoruichi became. Her spiritual energy, usually a raging tempest, felt calm. Subdued. Naruto acted instantly. He used a flicker of shunpo to appear at her side, grabbing her arm and pulling her back out of the radius of the effect. Freed from the field, Yoruichi stumbled, catching her breath. It tries to pacify you, she said, her golden eyes narrowed. To make you as still and silent as it is. Brute force won't work. Attacking it directly is just feeding energy into its field of order. So we can't use big attacks, Naruto surmised. We have to be faster than its influence can spread. And we have to be chaotic. Chaos. A predatory grin spread across Yoruichi's face. Now you're speaking my language. The battle began. It was a fight unlike any they had ever experienced. They couldn't overpower the constructs. They had to outthink them. Naruto created a dozen cage bunshin. The clones charged from all directions, a chaotic, unpredictable swarm. The constructs, fields of order expanded, trying to pacify them all at once, but the sheer unpredictability of the clones' movements seemed to confuse the simple, logic-based entities. While they were distracted, Yoruichi moved. Shunko, she roared. A vortex of volatile, high-pressure Kido erupted around her shoulders and back. It wasn't a focused blast. It was a storm of pure, chaotic energy. She didn't attack the constructs directly. She attacked the space around them, disrupting their fields of order with her own brand of violent energy. Under the cover of her assault, Naruto moved in. His 9 energy tails erupted from his back, not as weapons, but as extensions of his will. They moved like whips, like snakes, like unpredictable streams of energy, lashing out at the constructs from 9 different angles at once. He found their weakness. A single, core rune that floated in the center of their geometric bodies. His tails were too fluid, too chaotic for the constructs to pacify. One tail fainted high, another low, while a third pierced through the weakened field and shattered a core rune. The construct dissolved silently back into the floor. 2 down, 1 to go. As he moved toward the final construct, getting closer to the massive, cracked seal, a voice echoed in his mind. It was not a sound. It was a thought, planted directly into his consciousness. It was calm, ancient, and filled with a profound, weary sadness. Can you not feel the pain of this world, child of chaos? Naruto faltered for a second, the voice a jarring intrusion. Every conflict, every loss, every tear shed is a discordant note in the grand symphony of existence. I offer a solution, a perfect, final peace. A world of absolute unity, where no soul is ever alone, ever in pain, ever lost. A world of perfect order. He saw a vision in his mind, a universe of crystalline stillness. No war, no hunger, no grief. But no joy, either. No laughter, no love, no choice. It was a beautiful, silent, and utterly dead paradise. A world without choice is a prison, Naruto thought back, his resolve hardening as he pushed the vision away. Choice is the source of all suffering, the voice replied gently. I will save you from it. I will save you all. The final construct raised both hands, and the pacifying field intensified. But Naruto was already through. His tails, guided by a surge of defiant anger, pierced the construct from all sides, shattering its core. The cavern fell silent once more. But the voice lingered in his head, a chilling echo. Naruto, are you all right? Yoruichi was at his side, her hand on his shoulder. You zoned out for a second there. It spoke to me, he said, his voice grim. It told me what it wants. He looked at the cracked seal, and knew with absolute certainty that their mission was over. They had their information. They had seen the enemy. We need to go, he said. Now. They began their retreat, fighting their way past newly formed constructs. The escape was a desperate, high-speed flight back through the crushing darkness, the gentle, horrifying promises of the forgotten god echoing in Naruto's mind. They emerged back into the sterile white antechamber. Gasping for breath, the oppressive pressure of the Mukan finally releasing its grip. They were bruised, exhausted, and deeply shaken. Back in Kiraku's office, they gave their report. The failing seal, the conceptual nature of its defenses, and the voice. Kiraku listened in grim silence, his face etched with a gravity Naruto had never seen on him before. A primordial tie that wants to assimilate all of reality into a state of perfect order, Kiraku mused, his voice barely a whisper. The original Gote 13 sealed it away, believing it too dangerous to destroy. It seems their prison was not as eternal as they had hoped. He looked at Naruto, then at Yoruichi. You have confirmed our worst fears. We are facing a god. And we have absolutely no idea how to kill it. The room was silent. The faint light filtering through the shoji screens seemed dimmer now. The echoes of a forgotten god had been heard, and the Soul Society, blissfully unaware, was standing on the brink of an abyss. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A captain's duty, a husband's vow. The summons arrived not with a polite messenger, but with the cold finality of a jailer's key turning in a lock. A hell butterfly, its wings a stark, judicial black, fluttered into Naruto's office and dissolved into a single, crisp scroll. The spiritual pressure embedded in the parchment was ancient and unyielding, the collective will of the Central 46. It didn't request his presence. It commanded it. Rangiku was there, ostensibly to deliver reports from Squad 10, but in reality, to offer a silent, steadying presence. Yoruichi materialized from the shadows of the ceiling a moment after the butterfly dispersed, landing on the floor without a sound. She read the summons over Naruto's shoulder, her golden eyes narrowing. To answer for the crime of harboring a declared enemy of the state and defying the established chain of command, she read aloud, her voice dripping with contempt. How predictably theatrical of them. They make it sound like you've been plotting a coup, aren't I? Naruto asked, a humorless smile touching his lips as he rolled the scroll back up. He wasn't afraid. The time for fear had passed the moment he'd stepped between Harribel and the other captains. What he felt now was a heavy, cold certainty, the feeling of a man walking toward a confrontation he knew was inescapable. They're going to demand her execution, Rangiku said quietly, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim seriousness. And they'll try to make an example of you for refusing to obey. Let them try, Naruto said. He stood up and reached for his captain's haori, shrugging the heavy white cloak over his shoulders. The black diamond of Squad 11 felt less like a symbol of rank today and more like a target. A storm's coming. If the first thing we do is start executing potential allies because of old grudges, we've already lost. You're not going alone, Yoruichi stated, a declaration, not a question. Wouldn't dream of it, he replied. Their walk to the central Great Underground Assembly Hall was a silent parade. Naruto led the way, his expression calm and determined. Yoruichi and Rangiku walked half a step behind him. One on each side. It was an unconscious formation, a display of solidarity so natural it was irrefutable. Akaku and Yumachika followed, their faces grim and their hands never straying far from their swords. They hadn't asked to come. When Naruto had started walking, they had simply fallen in behind him. The entire off-duty roster of Squad 11 had gathered in the main courtyard to see him off. Their silence a resounding roar of support. The Seraite watched them pass. Soul Reapers stopped their duties to stare. Some faces were filled with scorn, others with fear at this blatant challenge to authority. But many, Naruto noted, held a look of quiet, grudging respect. He was doing what many of them had only ever thought about, telling the faceless old men in the IR chambers that their laws were not absolute. You've rattled the cage, Naruto, Yoruichi murmured, her voice too low for anyone else to hear. The monkeys are screeching. Good, he murmured back. Maybe they'll finally realize the tiger is at the door. The entrance to the assembly hall was a descent into the earth, a journey into the heart of the Soul Society's oldest and most rigid traditions. The air grew still and cold. The final guards, their faces hidden behind impassive masks, opened the massive stone doors, revealing the chamber beyond. It was less a room and more a chasm of judgment. The chamber was circular, stark, and impossibly tall. High above, hidden in shadowed alcoves, sat the 46 magistrates. They were not visible as individuals, only as shrouded figures, their voices echoing down as a disembodied, unified chorus. Naruto walked to the center of the floor, his footsteps the only sound. His supporters were required to wait outside. He was alone. Captain Naruto Uzumaki of the 11th Division. The voice began, a dry, rustling sound like ancient pages turning. You stand accused of high crimes against the Seraite. You have knowingly provided sanctuary to the Arankar known as Harribel, a former espada in the army of the traitor Sosuke Aizen, an enemy directly responsible for the deaths of countless soul reapers. I am aware of her history, Naruto replied, his voice clear and strong, refusing to be intimidated by the echoing acoustics. You were given a direct order by Captain Soi Fan of the 2nd Division, a captain of senior standing, to stand aside and allow the execution of this enemy. You refused. You used your power to obstruct justice. I used my power to prevent the summary execution of a potential asset, Naruto corrected. An asset. The voice scoffed. The sound a harmony of 46 condescending sneers. A hollow. They are beasts of instinct and malice. They are a plague to be cleansed, not a resource to be cultivated. The law, written by the founders and upheld for 1,000 years, is unequivocal on this matter. The law was written for a world that no longer exists. Naruto's voice rose, a sudden surge of passion that silenced the chamber. It was written before we fought a civil war against our own kind, before we battled an army of Quincy that nearly wiped us from existence. We are facing a new enemy now. One that doesn't care about our laws or traditions. An enemy that was imprisoned by the very founders you speak of, an enemy that is now stirring from its sleep. You speak of unsubstantiated threats, Captain, the voice droned on. Utterly unmoved. Rumors from a fanatic's ravings and your own questionable reconnaissance. We deal in facts, in law. The fact is, Harribel is a threat. The law dictates she must be purged. Your refusal is an act of rebellion. My refusal is an act of foresight. Naruto shot back. What is the point of your perfect, orderly laws if there is no soul society left to govern? Blindly following tradition in the face of annihilation isn't discipline. It's suicide. There was a long, heavy silence. The 46 deliberated in whispers that slithered down from the darkness above. Naruto stood his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew what was coming. They were a wall. You could not reason with a wall. You could only break it or be broken against it. We have reached our verdict. The voice finally announced, its tone colder and sharper than before. Your arguments, while spirited, are irrelevant. The law is the foundation upon which the Soul Society stands. To allow it to be bent by the whims of a single, impulsive captain would be to invite chaos. The Arankar, Harribel, and her 3 subordinates will be remanded to the custody of the Onmitsukido for immediate execution. You, Captain Uzumaki, for your gross insubordination and your failure to uphold your sacred duties, are hereby stripped of your rank and command of the 11th Division, effective immediately. You will surrender your Zanpakuto and await further sentencing. The sentence was delivered. The gavel had fallen. In the suffocating silence of the chamber, Naruto slowly unclenched his fists. He looked up into the shadowed alcoves, at the faceless judges who had condemned him, and he began to laugh. It was not a sound of madness or despair. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated liberation. No, he said, the single word cutting through their shocked silence. What did you say? The voice demanded, its unity cracking for the first time. I said no, Naruto repeated, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. The calm spiritual pressure he normally maintained began to swell, filling the chamber, pushing back against the ancient, stagnant air. You talk about the law as a foundation. But you've let it become a tombstone. You sit up there in the dark, clutching your dusty scrolls, while the world moves on without you. You've become a fossil, A relic, incapable of seeing the real threats. He took a step forward, a defiant violation of protocol. You want Harribel, you'll have to come and take her. You want my command, you'll have to pry it from my cold, dead hands. You think you can strip me of my rank. My rank was given to me by the Gote 13, and it is to them, and to the people of the Soul Society, that I am loyal. Not to 46 shadows hiding in a cave. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of outraged shouts. This was unprecedented. This was rebellion. I, Naruto Uzumaki, captain of Squad 11, hereby declare that my squad and I no longer recognize the authority of this council. He announced, his voice booming with power. Our allegiance is sworn to the Captain Commander, and to the solemn duty of protecting every soul under our care. Cheer Harribel and her Fracken are under my personal protection. Anyone, from this council or otherwise, who attempts to harm them, will be considered an enemy of the 11th Division. And we will crush you. He turned his back on them, the ultimate insult, and walked toward the massive stone doors. He had not just refused an order. He had drawn a line in the sand and dared them to cross it. He had declared a cold war on his own government. The doors opened before he reached them, pushed from the outside by Yoruichi and Rangiku. They had heard everything. Yoruichi's face was alight with a fierce, predatory pride. Rangiku's eyes were wide, shining with a mixture of shock and unwavering adoration. Took you long enough, Yoruichi said with a grin. The acoustics in there are terrible, Naruto replied, walking past them into the light. The political storm he had unleashed was immediate and ferocious. But he didn't care. He walked away from the halls of power, leaving the shouts of the crumbling old order behind him. And headed home. That night, the Squad 11 barracks was an island of defiant calm in a sea of political chaos. A heavy silence had fallen over the Seraite as news of Naruto's declaration spread. Every captain was forced to consider their position. The Gote 13 was fractured. Naruto stood alone in the private gardens behind his captain's quarters. The air was cool, and the only sound was the gentle trickle of a small bamboo fountain. He wasn't celebrating. He was feeling the true, crushing weight of his choice. He had potentially split the Soul Society in two on the eve of its greatest threat. The door to the garden slid open. Yoruichi, Rangiku, and Harribel entered together. They didn't speak, just came to stand with him in the moonlight. That was quite a speech, Yoruichi said, breaking the silence. Even Byakuya would have been impressed by the sheer arrogance of it. I've never been prouder, Rangiku added softly, her voice thick with emotion. She came to his side and, without hesitation, took his hand. Her touch was a warm anchor in the turbulent sea of his thoughts. Harribel stood before him, her green eyes filled with an intensity he had not seen before. I have spent my existence in a world where the strong devour the weak, she said, her voice low and steady. Loyalty is a weapon, and trust is a vulnerability. Today, you sacrificed your position, your safety. Everything, for me, for my Fracken, an enemy. I do not have the words to comprehend such an act. She took a breath, and then slowly, deliberately, she knelt. Her Fracken, who had followed her into the garden, did the same. My life, and the lives of my Fracken, are yours, Harribel declared, not as a defeated foe, but as a sworn vassal. We pledge our loyalty not to an alliance, not to the Seraite. We pledge it to you, Naruto Uzumaki. Our blades are now yours to command. Naruto looked down at her, then at Yoruichi's proud smile, and at Rangiku's hand held firmly in his. In that moment, everything crystallized. The political fallout, the coming war, the waking god, all of it was secondary. The reason he fought, the reason he had made his stand, was standing right here in this garden. Get up, Harribel, he said gently. He reached down, offering her his free hand. I don't want your servitude. I want your strength, your partnership. She looked at his hand, then took it and rose to her feet. He looked between the three of them, the woman who had seen his potential and honed his power, the woman who had stood by his side with unwavering loyalty, the woman whose life he had saved and who now offered him her own. They were his past, his present, his future. I didn't do this for the Soul Society, he confessed, his voice raw with an emotion he could no longer contain. I mean, I did. But that's not what was in my head when I was in that chamber. I was thinking about all of you. He looked at Yoruichi. I thought about a world where I couldn't spar with you, argue with you, see you smile. Quote. He looked at Rangiku. I thought about a world without your laughter, your strength that you try so hard to hide, your unwavering belief in me. He looked at Harribel. And I thought about a world where I let them kill you, simply because it was easier. And I couldn't accept any of it. That's not a world I want to protect. He took a deep breath, the confession tumbling out of him. I love you, all of you. It's not a choice between you. It's, you three are the pillars of my world. My home. The reason I fight. The only thing that truly matters. The words hung in the moonlit air. A vow more profound than any law, more binding than any ceremony. Yoruichi stepped forward, a slow, dangerous, and incredibly loving smile spreading across her face. Well, it's about time you said it, you idiot. She cupped his face in her hands and kissed him, a fierce, passionate kiss that tasted of defiance and absolute devotion. Rangiku's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pure joy. She surged forward, wrapping her arms around him from the side, pressing her face against his shoulder. I love you too, she whispered, her voice choked with happiness. Harribel simply watched them, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm, over Rangiku's. Her touch was a cool, steady pressure. A silent, solemn acceptance. A queen's vow, given not in words, but in a simple, profound gesture of commitment. He stood there, in the quiet heart of his personal rebellion. With his arms around the three most powerful and important women in his life. He was a captain without a government, a rebel, a target. But for the first time since coming to this world, he was not just a protector or a warrior. He was home. They were a family, forged in the fires of defiance, and together, they would face the coming storm. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The First Bell of Assimilation. Peace was a foreign concept in the Squad 11 barracks, a fleeting visitor that rarely stayed for long. Yet, in the quiet aftermath of Naruto's rebellion, a strange sort of calm had settled. It was the calm of a decision made. A line drawn. In the captain's private quarters, a space that had once been Spartan and functional, a semblance of home was beginning to form. The four of them sat around a low table in the living area. A pot of fragrant tea steamed between them, its gentle aroma a stark contrast to the undercurrent of tension that still gripped the seraite. The meal was simple, but it was shared. It was a novelty that still felt fragile, experimental. Harribel was a study in stillness, her posture regal even in the simple robes she wore. She observed the interactions more than she participated, her green eyes moving from Naruto's easy smile to Rangiku's expressive gestures. This casual domesticity was more alien to her than any battlefield. Honestly, if I have to stand to one more noble complaint about the breakdown of order, I'm going to start assigning them latrine duty, Rangiku sighed, pouring more tea for everyone. She was trying, with a gentle, persistent warmth, to include Harribel in their circle. You'd think he'd declared himself the new Soul King, not just told a bunch of fossils to mind their own business. Give them time, Yoruichi said, leaning back with a cat-like contentment. Her feet propped up on a stool. They're just upset that someone finally called their bluff. For centuries, no one has had the guts to do it. They don't actually know what to do now that their biggest threat, excommunication, has been met with a shrug. Naruto watched them, a quiet satisfaction warming his chest. He saw the way Rangiku deliberately sat next to Harribel. The way Yoruichi's playful jabs were aimed at lightening the mood for everyone. He saw Harribel, in turn, accept the cup of tea from Rangiku with a quiet nod of acknowledgement. They were not just three women in his life. They were beginning to form their own connections, a complex and powerful web of respect. Let them screech, Naruto said, taking a sip of his tea. Kiraku is keeping THM busy with so much procedural red tape they won't be able to make a move for weeks. By then, we'll have bigger problems to worry about. His words, meant to be reassuring, hung in the air with an unintended weight. Bigger problems. The forgotten god in its failing prison. As if summoned by the thought, a sound ripped through the seraite. It was not the familiar, guttural roar of a hollow alarm. It was a high-pitched, piercing chime. A single, sustained note that vibrated in the bones and set every Soul Reaper's teeth on edge. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in a century. A code black, a threat of unknown origin and catastrophic potential. Simultaneously, a crimson hell butterfly, reserved for the Captain Commander's most urgent communications, shot through the wall of the barracks and hovered before Naruto. Hiraku's voice, stripped of all its usual laziness, emanated from its wings. Naruto. Rukongai. District 32. Dancing Sparrow. Something is wrong. All communications have ceased. The spiritual pressure is peaceful. Get there now. It's the closest district to the assimilation site we discovered before. The domestic peace shattered. In an instant, they were no longer a fledgling family sharing tea. They were warriors. Naruto was on his feet, his captain's hauri already being settled on his shoulders by a silent, efficient Yoruichi. Akaku, Yumichika, full squad mobilization. We move out in 2 minutes. He bellowed, his voice carrying easily through the barracks. Rangiku was already at the door, her hand on Hineka's hilt. Harribel stood, her expression grim. You should stay here, Naruto said to her, his tone leaving no room for argument. The political situation is too volatile. If you're seen, my loyalty is to you, not to Seraite politics. Harribel cut him off, her voice like ice. The voice you heard in the prison, the philosophy of oblivion that grants follows, they may be connected. My experience could be valuable. I will not be sheltered like a child while my protector walks into danger. He met her gaze. He saw the unyielding resolve of a queen, and the absolute sincerity of the vow she had made in the garden. To refuse her would be to insult her. Stay close, was all he said. Within moments, they were a streak of blurring black, orange, and white, crossing the Seraite at top speed. Squad 11, a force of disciplined killers, followed in their wake. Their collective spiritual pressure a tangible wave. They arrived at the border of District 32, and pulled up short. What they saw stopped them cold. There was no fire, no destruction, no screaming. The district was silent, utterly, profoundly silent, and it was beautiful. From the ground, from the walls of the simple wooden houses, from the very air itself, crystalline structures were growing. They resembled trees of pure, translucent quartz, branching out in perfect, geometric patterns. They pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, casting the entire district in a gentle, ethereal glow. The people were still there. A woman, reaching for a piece of fruit at a market stall. 2 children, frozen mid-laugh in a game of tag. An old man, sitting on his porch, his hand outstretched to a cat. They weren't dead. They were encased, preserved in the shimmering crystal, their faces serene, peaceful, almost blissful. Faint, shimmering threads of light, their souls, were being slowly, gently drawn from their bodies into the crystalline network, becoming part of the glowing whole. What is this? Akaku breathed, his usual bloodlust replaced by a horrified awe. There was no fight. This is it, Naruto said, his voice grim. This is the assimilation the voice in the Mukan promised. As they stepped across the invisible border into the district, they felt it. It was not an attack. It was a sensation, a gentle wave of peace and contentment that washed over them. It was the spiritual equivalent of a warm bath, a soft bed after a long day. It whispered to the soul, promising an end to struggle, an end to pain. Rest. Join us. Be whole. It took a conscious act of will to push against the feeling, to remember that this beautiful peace was the face of utter annihilation. Harribel let out a low hiss, her hand clutching her zanpakuto. This is a violation, she snarled. It denies the soul its right to struggle, to exist. It is a death more complete than oblivion. From the center of the district, the light intensified. The assimilated souls began to coalesce. They rose from the crystal trees, their forms vaguely humanoid, angelic, made of pure light and crystal. They had no distinct faces, only a shifting, composite image of the thousands of souls that now made them one. One of the beings floated toward them. It didn't radiate malice. It radiated a deep, profound sadness, a compassionate pity for those who still suffered under the burden of individuality. You are still separate, its voice echoed in their minds, a chorus of 1,000 whispers speaking as one. You are still in pain. Let it go. Release your burden. Join our perfect, silent peace. Be saved. Saved. Rangiku whispered, her face pale. She could see the faint outline of a child's face within the Guardian's form. This isn't salvation. This is erasure. The Guardian raised a hand, and a wave of the pacifying energy washed over them, stronger this time. The urge to simply drop their weapons, to close their eyes and accept the peace, was immense. Don't let it touch you, Naruto yelled, shaking his head to clear it. Fight it. Hold on to who you are. Akaku roared, a primal scream of defiance against the unnatural calm. Extend, Hozukimaru. He lunged, his three-sectioned staff a whirlwind of destructive force. But the Guardian did not try to block the attack. As Hozukimaru's blades neared, they simply slowed. The fierce, chaotic energy of the attack was becalmed, smoothed over, until the weapon stopped inches from the Guardian's face, its momentum completely negated. It's like the constructs in the Muken. Yoruichi analyzed, her body tense. It doesn't fight you, it imposes its nature on you. The Guardian gently touched the tip of Hozukimaru. A crystalline structure began to creep up the staff, threatening to assimilate the weapon itself. Akaku wrenched it back with a curse. This was a battle they couldn't win with brute force. We have to contain it. Rangiku yelled, her mind racing. She was the first to adapt. We can't let this spread. Scatter. Hineka. Her blade dissolved, but instead of a storm of cutting ash, she wove it into a massive, swirling gray curtain, a thick, impenetrable barrier between the advancing assimilation and the next district. The crystalline growth touched the wall of ash and slowed, its orderly nature struggling against the chaotic, ever-shifting particles of her Zanpakuto. Harribel saw the logic in containment. Tiburon, she roared, releasing her resurrection. She transformed, her mask fragment disappearing, her massive shark-toothed sword appearing in her hand. But she did not attack. She raised the blade and summoned a colossal wave of water, not to crush, but to push. The water was a physical barrier, forcing the Guardians back, slowing their inexorable advance. Her cold, predatory fury was the perfect antidote to their placid influence. Yoruichi became a blur of lightning. Shunko, she cried, the volatile Kido erupting around her. She was too fast, too chaotic for the Guardians, pacifying fields to lock onto. She wasn't targeting the Guardians themselves, but the largest crystal trees they seemed to be drawing power from. She moved like a surgeon, her lightning-clad fists shattering the focal points, causing the network to flicker and momentarily weaken. Naruto stood at the heart of it all, feeling the alent screams of the thousands of souls being digested. The fox within him, the ultimate symbol of wild, chaotic chakra, raged against this perfect, sterile order. He knew they couldn't just defend. They had to create a counter-presence. He didn't release his Bankai. He didn't dare, not in such a populated area. But he drew upon its essence. He stabbed Kyubi no Kitsune into the ground. Tereikyoku, sanctuary, a dome of swirling, vibrant orange energy erupted from him, spreading outwards. It was not an attack. It was a territory. Inside the dome, the god's influence was violently repelled. The air was filled with Naruto's own life-filled, chaotic spiritual pressure. The gentle whispers were replaced by roaring vitality. His squad, who had been struggling against the pacifying effect, suddenly felt invigorated. Their resolve hardened, but it was not enough. For every crystal tree Yoruichi shattered, two more grew. Rangiku's ash wall was beginning to crystallize at the edges. Harribel's water was slowly being turned to perfectly ordered ice. They were holding the line, but they were losing ground. The entire district, a square mile of homes and lives, was almost completely consumed. Naruto looked at the faces of his friends, his wives, his squad. He saw the strain, the horror, the desperate fight in their eyes. And he made the hardest choice of his life as a captain. Fall back, he ordered, his voice cracking with the weight of the words. Everyone, fall back to the district line. Kido Corps, I need a perimeter. We're sealing the district. The words landed like a physical blow. Sealing the district, sacrificing it, condemning the thousands of souls still trapped within to their crystalline fate. It was a horrifying, but necessary, strategic choice. His squad pulled back, their faces a mixture of relief and profound guilt. They regrouped behind Rangiku's failing ash wall, as Kido experts, summoned by Kyoraku, began to arrive. We need to build a permanent wall, Naruto commanded, taking charge of the chaotic scene. Bakudo number 99, Part 2, Banken. We'll layer it. A total, absolute seal. It took hours. Naruto stood at the forefront, pouring his own immense spiritual energy into the barrier, guiding the dozens of Kido experts. He worked with a grim, mechanical focus, refusing to look at the beautiful, silent tragedy unfolding behind the shimmering wall they were creating. Finally, it was done. A massive, semi-transparent wall of golden Kido now surrounded the entirety of District 32. Inside, the assimilation was complete. The Dancing Sparrow district was gone, replaced by a silent, glittering forest of crystal and light, a beautiful tomb for 10,000 souls. Naruto stood before the barrier, his shoulders slumped. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. Yoruichi, Rangiku, and Harribel came to stand with him. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They simply stood beside him, their presence a silent, shared burden. He could see their reflections in the shimmering wall. A captain and his 3 queens, staring into the heart of their new enemy. The first bell had been rung. The first battle had been fought. And they had lost. The war had begun not with a bang, but with a beautiful, terrible silence. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Unlikely Alliance. The crystalline tomb of District 32 stood as a silent, glittering monument to their failure. In the days that followed, a pall fell over the Seraite. The boisterous energy of Squad 11 was gone, replaced by a grim, focused silence. The political squabbling of Central 46 and the noble houses seemed petty, childish, in the face of such an existential threat. The sealed district was a constant, shimmering reminder on the horizon. The god was awake. And this was only the beginning. The emergency captain's meeting was held not in the Grand Assembly Hall, but in the stark, functional war room beneath the 1st Division barracks. A SSIVE map of the Seraite and its surrounding Rukongai districts was spread across a central table. A large, angry red marker had been placed over the location of the Dancing Sparrow district. It was a wound on the map, a void where 10,000 souls used to be. The mood was somber, the air thick with tension. The schism Naruto had created by defying Central 46 was a palpable presence in the room. Some captains wouldn't meet his eyes. Soi Fan stood rigid in a corner, her fury a cold, contained thing. Byakuya Kuchiki was impassive as always, but his stillness seemed heavier, more thoughtful. Captain Commander Kiraku, foregoing his usual seat, stood at the head of the table. The Kido Corps has reinforced the Banken seal around District 32, he began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. The assimilation has been contained. For now. But we must operate under the assumption that this was not a singular event. This was a statement of intent. A demonstration. A demonstration of what? Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya asked, his arms crossed, his young face etched with a frustration that went beyond his years. We fought it. We couldn't harm its guardians. We couldn't halt its advance. All we could do was build a wall and sacrifice everyone inside. What kind of strategy is that? A losing one. Naruto spoke up, his voice drawing every eye in the room. He, Yoruichi, and Rangiku stood together, a small, defiant faction. He had insisted they be present. We treated it like a battle. It wasn't. It was a conversion. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to save us. And that's 1,000 times more dangerous. What are you proposing, Uzumaki? Soi Fan finally spat, her voice dripping with venom. That we reason with it. You, who have already proven you are willing to harbor the enemy. Now suggest we negotiate with this phenomenon. I'm proposing we stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like survivors, Naruto shot back, his gaze unwavering. The power that thing wields is conceptual. It imposes its will on reality. Our swords, our Kido, our Bankai, they're like trying to punch the ocean. We can't beat it with what we have. We don't have enough power. We don't have enough variety in our approach. Kiraku nodded slowly. Naruto is right. The original Gote 13, who faced this entity, were said to be monsters of unimaginable power, and even they could only seal it, not destroy it. We are their descendants, but we are not their equals in raw strength. We need more. He let that sink in. The captains, the pinnacle of the Soul Society's military might, were being told they were not enough. So we need allies. Kiraku continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. And we can no longer afford to be selective. He looked directly at Naruto. It was time. Naruto took a step forward. I propose a formal, wartime alliance with every viable power that is not actively trying to erase existence. I'm talking about the Vizards, the Fullbringers, and I'm talking about what's left of Hueco Mundo. The room erupted. Absolutely not. Soy Fawn exploded. Alliance with Hollows. After everything they have done. It is the height of insanity. Several other captains murmured their assent. The idea was a deep, instinctual violation of everything they stood for. With respect, Captain Soy Fawn, Naruto countered, his voice cutting through the noise, your grudge is a luxury we can no longer afford. The Urankar who followed Aizen are mostly dead or scattered. What's left is a fractured world of survivors. And they are just as threatened by this perfect peace as we are. Harribel's testimony proves that. At that moment, the doors to the war room slid open. A silent, grim-faced Harribel stepped inside. Her presence sucked the air out of the room. She was an enemy, a monster from a bloody war, standing in their most sacred strategic space. Soy Fawn's hand flew to her Zanpakuto. She is here at my invitation, Kiraku said, his voice quelling the immediate aggression. Speak, Lady Harribel. Tell them what you told us. Harribel's gaze swept over the assembled captains, cold and unflinching. She was a queen, even here. The Urankar who attacked me, Grants, spoke of a true emptiness. He and his followers seek not to rule, but to unmake. To consume everything into nothingness. It is the opposite of Aizen's desire for evolution. It is a philosophy of despair. This, assimilation, she said, her lip curling in disgust, is merely a different path to the same end, the annihilation of the self. Whether you are consumed by silence or by nothingness, the result is the same. Your struggle, and ours, is now one. We fight to exist. Her words, coming from the mouth of a former Espada, were more powerful than any argument Naruto could have made. He framed the conflict not as a Soul Reaper problem, but as a problem for all existence. A long silence followed. It was Byakuya Kuchiki who broke it. The logic is distasteful, he said, his voice as cool and precise as ever. But it is sound. I would rather wield a distasteful weapon than accept an elegant defeat. If these beings can aid in the protection of the Soul Society, then we have a duty to consider it. Toshiro nodded his agreement. A pragmatic solution to an overwhelming problem. I support it. One by one, the pragmatic and the desperate began to outweigh the traditionalists. The vote was cast. The motion passed. A new, terrifying chapter in the history of the Soul Society had begun. The plan was twofold. Naruto and Harribel would travel to Hueco Mundo. Her presence was essential. She was royalty there, and her word, even in exile, carried weight. They would seek out the strongest remaining factions and forge a pact. Meanwhile, Yoruichi and Rangiku would remain in the Seraite. Their mission was just as critical. They would handle the internal politics, smoothing the feathers of the furious noble houses and coordinating with the arriving allies. Kiraku had Alred. Why sent word to the Vizards and Fullbringers? He was calling in every favor, every debt he was owed. The journey through the Garganta was a nauseating, chaotic tumble through a black void. When they emerged, it was into the eternal, unnatural night of Hueco Mundo. A bone-white desert stretched to an impossible horizon under a crescent moon that never moved. The air was dry, filled with the faint, lingering despair of a billion lost souls. Harribel took a deep breath, the air of her homeland seeming to invigorate her. Las Noches is this way, she said, pointing toward a colossal white structure in the distance. A palace so vast it seemed like a mountain range. But it is a ruin, a ghost. The factions that matter now are scattered throughout the Manos forest. Who's the strongest? The one we need to convince. Naruto asked, his senses on high alert. The reishi here was thick, wild, and predatory. The one who respects strength above all else, Harribel replied, a flicker of something, respect. Or perhaps weariness, in her eyes. The one who would never bow to a god of silence because it would mean the end of a good fight. Grimjow Jagerjaquez. They found him in the skeletal remains of a vast, dead forest. He sat on a throne of fused, crystalline trees, looking every bit the Panther King. He was surrounded by a rough-looking contingent of Urankar, survivors who had flocked to his banner of pure, unapologetic power. His lazy, arrogant smirk was the first thing they saw. Well, Grimjow drawled, his piercing blue eyes fixing on them. The Lost Queen returns, and she's brought a Soul Reaper pet with her. To what do I owe the displeasure? We are not here to fight, Jagerjackes, Harribel said, her tone formal and cold. Then you've come to the wrong place, he shot back, his smirk widening. Fighting is all that's left. Is it? Naruto stepped forward. What kind of fight can you have against an enemy that doesn't hit back? An enemy that just erases you with peace and quiet. Doesn't sound like your style. Grimjow's eyes narrowed, the lazy arrogance replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. I've heard whispers of a new power, one that makes things silent. Still, I don't like it. Neither do we, Naruto said. A god has woken up. It's consuming our world, and it will eventually come for yours. It's already started. District 32 of the Rukongai is gone. 10,000 souls, assimilated. Wiped from existence. A Soul Reaper problem, Grimjow scoffed, though his interest was clearly piqued. A problem for anything that likes to have a choice, Naruto corrected. He's offering two options. Join his silent chorus or cease to be. I'm here to offer a third. Fight back. Together. Grimjow laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Together. You want me, Grimjow Jagerjackes, to fight alongside Soul Reapers. The ones who put this scar on my chest. He gestured to the healed wound from his battle with Ichigo. Give me one good reason why I should trust a single word that comes out of your mouth. Quote, because she does, Naruto said, nodding to Harribel. And because of this, Grimjow's eyes widened. He suddenly shot to his feet, his hand a blur as he gathered Reishi. Gran Rei Sero, a massive, sky-tearing blast of blue energy, distorted with his own blood, screamed toward Naruto. It was an attack meant to obliterate, a test of pure power. Naruto didn't move, he simply raised one hand. His palm open, one of his 9 energy tails, condensed and solid, whipped in front of him, forming a small, swirling shield no bigger than a dinner plate. The Gran Rei Sero slammed into the shield. There was no explosion. The apocalyptic blast was simply caught. It churned and spun, absorbed into the vortex of Naruto's chaotic energy before harmlessly dissipating into the air. Silence. Grimjow's jaw was slack, his Arankar stared in disbelief. He had just thrown one of his most powerful attacks at this Soul Reaper, and it had been neutralized with less effort than swatting a fly. The god we're fighting does stuff like that, Naruto said calmly, lowering his hand. Only it does it to everything. To your anger, your pride, your will to fight. It pacifies you until you're nothing but a pretty statue. I'd rather face your Sero any day. At least it's honest. He had spoken in Grimjow's language, the language of overwhelming, undeniable strength. And he had shown respect for that strength, even as he surpassed it. Grimjow stared at him for a long moment, the gears turning in his head. Finally, the arrogant smirk returned, but this time it was different. It held a spark of genuine excitement. A god, huh, he said, a thrill in his voice. Now that sounds like a real fight. Back in the Seraite, Yoruichi and Rangiku maneuvered through a different kind of battlefield. They stood in a serene, private garden within the Kuchiki estate, facing Byakuya. The other noble houses are on the verge of demanding your public censure, Byakuya stated. His voice as calm as the placid koi pond beside them. They see this alliance as a stain on our honor. Honor is a fine thing to have when you're alive, Yoruichi countered, her tone sharp. It makes a poor shield. You saw what happened to District 32. Is your pride more important than preventing that from happening to the Seraite itself? It is not my pride that concerns me, Byakuya replied. It is the stability of the Gote 13. Your captain's actions have fractured us. No, Rangiku interjected, her voice respectful but firm. Captain Uzumaki's actions have revealed the cracks that were already there. Between tradition and pragmatism, between the old ways and the necessity of survival, we can either let those cracks shatter us, or we can build a bridge across them. That's what this alliance is. It's a bridge. Byakuya was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. The world is changing. The duty of the Kuchiki clan is to maintain order. If the old order is insufficient to protect the Soul Society, then a new one must be forged. He finally looked at them, a flicker of resolve in his gray eyes. You will have my support. I will speak to the other clan heads. But know this. If this alliance fails, or if these allies betray us, the consequences will be absolute. It was a victory. A cold, conditional victory, but a victory nonetheless. One by one, they gathered them. Shinji Hirako and the other vizards arrived, their cynical attitudes barely concealing their grim understanding of the threat. The Fullbringers, led by Kugo Ginjo, were brought in under heavy guard, their allegiance bought with promises of amnesty and a chance to survive. The final gathering took place on the vast, white sands of Hueco Mundo, a neutral ground. The Garganta opened, and the captains of the Gote 13 stepped through. They saw the army Naruto and Harribel had assembled, Grimmjow's brutal faction, Harribel's loyal Fracken, and dozens of other smaller groups of Arrancar who had been convinced to join the fight for survival. Soul Reapers, Vizards, and Arrancar stood facing each other under the pale moonlight of a dead world. Old enemies, bitter rivals, an army of contradictions, united only by their shared desire not to be erased. Naruto stood between the two forces, the weight of this impossible alliance resting squarely on his shoulders. He had his army, he had his allies, but as he looked at the disparate, distrustful faces staring back at him, he knew that the battle to unite them would be just as hard as the war against the silent god waiting to consume them all. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Siege of the Seraite. The final moments of the old world were not marked by a roar, but by a profound and unnerving silence. Deep in the lightless heart of the Mukan, the Great Seal, the masterwork of the original Gote 13, finally gave out. There was no explosion, no cataclysmic release of destructive energy. Instead, there was a single, silent pulse of pure, white light, an anti-sound that expanded outwards, erasing everything it touched. In the war room, every sensor and monitor connected to the Mukan went dead. The oppressive, orderly pressure they had been tracking for weeks vanished from their instruments. Not fading, but ceasing to exist entirely. For a horrifying second, there was nothing. Shunsui Kyoraku, standing over the strategic map, did not need the instruments to tell him what had happened. He felt it in his bones, a sudden, chilling emptiness in the fabric of the Soul Society, as if a load-bearing wall in the architecture of reality had just been removed. "It's out," he said, his voice a low, grim whisper. And then the world broke. High above, the serene, artificial sky of the Seraite, a symbol of eternal order, fractured. It did not tear open like a garganta. It cracked like a pane of glass struck by an invisible hammer. Jagged white lines spread across the flawless blue, and from these cracks, the phenomenon began to descend. It was not a creature, not an army. It was a wave, a slow, inexorable tide of pure, crystalline energy, a silent aurora of pearlescent light that drifted downwards with a terrifying, gentle grace. It was beautiful, and as the first shimmering tendrils of its energy touched the spires of the highest towers in the Seraite, they began to change. The stone and wood did not crumble or burn. They were assimilated, transformed into the same glowing, geometric crystal that had consumed District 32. The process was silent, orderly, and absolute. The alarms screamed, a single, desperate, continuous wail that echoed from every corner of the city. The siege of the Seraite had begun. "Go!" Kyoraku roared, and the war room emptied in a flurry of blurred shunpo. The newly forged army of the Soul Society met the descending wave with a roar of defiance. Grimmjow Jagerjackes, his face split in a wide, manic grin, was one of the first to attack. "Let's see what this god is made of," he bellowed, charging a crimson Gran Rey Cero. The blast, powerful enough to warp the fabric of space, tore through the air and slammed into the descending curtain of light. For a moment, it held, a sphere of violent red pushing against the placid white. Then, like a flame being doused in water, the Cero was simply smoothed over. Its chaotic energy was pacified, its color drained, until it dissolved into a harmless shower of sparkling motes. Grimmjow's grin vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "What the hell?" Shinji Hirako, his visored mask already materializing on his face, released his Shikai. Collapse. Sakanade. A pink mist poured from his blade, designed to invert an opponent's senses and leave them hopelessly disoriented. But the wave had no senses to invert. It was a force of nature, and it continued its descent. Utterly unaffected, the wave touched the ground. The pristine white paving stones of the central thoroughfare began to crystallize, the transformation spreading like frost. From the ground, the crystalline guardians began to rise. Dozens, then hundreds of them, faceless and silent, their forms shimmering with the captured souls of District 32. They did not attack with malice. They simply advanced, their pacifying fields extending before them, the very air growing thick and heavy with the promise of serene oblivion. The battle became a chaotic, desperate struggle for existence. It was a clash of fundamentally opposite natures. The wild, passionate, and chaotic energies of the Soul Reapers and their new allies versus the silent, inexorable order of a forgotten god. Do not let them box you in. Keep moving. Their fields are weakest on the perimeter. Rangiku's voice cut through the din. She stood atop a barracks roof, not as a frontline combatant, but as a field commander. Scatter, Heineka. Her blade dissolved into a colossal cloud of ash, a swirling gray storm that she spread across an entire sector of the city. It wasn't an attack, it was a screen. The crystalline wave met the ash, and its advance slowed. The perfectly orderly energy struggled to assimilate the millions of constantly shifting, chaotic particles. It was like trying to build a perfect wall of sand in a hurricane. Beside her stood Harribel. Her resurrection was already active, the massive shark-toothed sword held high. All Arankar, focus your seros on my position, she commanded, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen. A dozen blasts of crimson energy, from her Fracken and Grimjow's subordinates, flew towards her. But they did not strike her. She absorbed them into her own attack. Cascada, she swung her blade down, and a colossal, pressurized wave of water, supercharged with the combined power of their seros, crashed down into the street below. It was not a gentle tide. It was a tsunami, a physical manifestation of chaotic force that slammed into the advancing guardians, shattering their crystalline forms and physically pushing back against the encroaching assimilation. Water, the very symbol of unpredictable flow, was a potent weapon against perfect stillness. On another front, Yoruichi was a phantom of destruction. She was no longer in her human form. NS formation born of her mastery over her own soul and the chaotic energy of Shunko had turned her into something new. She was a great cat, larger than a panther, but her body was streamlined, her fur crackling with an aura of golden lightning. A living bolt of thunder. This was her thunder cat form, the pinnacle of her speed and power. She was too fast to be seen, a blur of motion that the pacifying fields could never hope to lock onto. She wasn't fighting the guardians, she was targeting the city itself. Where the assimilation was thickest, where massive crystal spires were erupting from the ground, she would strike. Her claws, wreathed in lightning, tore through the base of the crystalline structures, disrupting the flow of energy. She was chaos incarnate, a one-woman insurgency against the new, sterile order. Buying time with every impossibly fast strike. But for every guardian Harribel's wave shattered, two more rose. Rangiku's ash wall was beginning to thin, the crystal creeping through its edges. Yoruichi could disrupt, but she could not halt the advance. They were fighting a tide that did not tire, did not feel pain, did not need morale. And they were losing. Naruto saw it all. He stood on the slope of Sokyoku Hill, the one place in the Seraite that had seen true, world-altering change before. From this vantage point, he could see the full scale of the siege. He saw his squad fighting with desperate courage. He saw Akaku's Bankai cracking the crystalline ground, only for it to instantly reform. He saw the Visored struggling, their hollow powers providing own resistance but ultimately being overwhelmed. He saw his friends, his loves, fighting a brilliant, valiant, and doomed battle. A defensive war was a slow death. He couldn't just fight the god's reality. He had to impose his own. He took a deep breath, the reishi of the entire Seraite seeming to draw towards him. He held Kyubi no Kitsune aloft, its simple form belying the universe of power it contained. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in absolute focus. He felt the bonds connecting him to the three women fighting for his world, for their world. Their strength, their love, their fierce spirits became his anchor. Bankai. The word was a whisper, yet it shook the foundations of the Soul Society. Tereikyoku. Kyubi no Choa. Grand Spirit Sphere. Harmony of the Nine Tails. There was no explosion of spiritual pressure. There was a moment of absolute silence, and then reality bent. From Naruto, a wave of pure, golden-orange energy erupted outwards, not as a destructive blast, but as a creation. It was the color of a sunrise, the warmth of a hearth, the vibrancy of life itself. The sterile white light of the god's assimilation wave was not destroyed by this energy, it was pushed back, repelled. As two fundamentally opposite truths battled for dominance. A massive, shimmering sphere of this golden light expanded from Sokyoku Hill, covering a vast portion of the central Seraite. The sky within this dome was no longer cracked white, but a swirling vortex of vibrant color, like a painter's canvas come to life. The ground beneath their feet, once sterile stone, now pulsed with a faint, living energy. The air itself felt different, wild, unpredictable, and crackling with vitality. He had not just released his power. He had created a battlefield. A pocket of reality governed by his own rules. The rules of chaos, of struggle, of life, and of free will. Inside the harmony of the Nine Tails, everything changed. The allied army felt it first. The oppressive, pacifying weight on their souls vanished, replaced by a surge of invigorating energy. Their Zanpakuto felt lighter, their Seros burned brighter, their resolve hardened into a sharp, joyful edge. The enemy felt it too. The crystalline guardians that formed within Naruto's territory were no longer perfect. They were flawed, unstable, their geometric forms corrupted by the chaotic energy that now defined their existence. They flickered, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. Their pacifying fields were shredded by the overwhelming vitality of the very air around them. They were vulnerable. Now, Naruto's voice boomed across his private world, not as a sound, but as a thought felt by all his allies. Fight. Here, we can win. The roar that went up from the allied army was a sound of pure, cathartic release. Grimjow, laughing like a madman, charged a Sero that now burned with a ferocious, untamed power, and it blasted a corrupted guardian into a million shimmering shards. Byakuya unleashed Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi, and his million tiny blades, no longer pacified, swirled into a beautiful, deadly storm that tore through the enemy ranks. Naruto stood at the epicenter on Sokyoku Hill, his golden energy tails now fully manifested, swirling around him like a celestial storm. He was the anchor of this new reality, his energy feeding the very ground his allies stood on, his will holding back the crushing pressure of a god. The strain was immense, sweat poured down his face, and his muscles screamed in protest. The dome of his Bankai was the only thing standing between the Soul Society and silent, beautiful oblivion. The siege was no longer on the Seraite. It was now focused on the lone figure on the hill, the defiant god of chaos who had dared to create a world where one could still fight back. The crystalline wave crashed against the golden sphere of his Bankai, the silent, orderly pressure of an entire universe trying to crush the vibrant, defiant reality he had wrought. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Maelstrom. The golden sphere of Naruto's Bankai was a defiant sun in a dying sky. Outside its shimmering border, the silent, crystalline tide of assimilation continued its inexorable crawl, consuming the outer districts of the Seraite. But inside, the war had turned. The allied forces, invigorated by the chaotic, life-filled energy of Naruto's world, were no longer just surviving. They were fighting. Yoruichi, in her Thunder Cat form, was a blur of golden lightning, her movements now impossibly fast within the supercharged environment. She tore through the flawed, corrupted guardians, their pacifying fields utterly useless against her sheer, untamed velocity. Rangiku's Hinata was a miles-wide storm of razor ash, no longer a defensive screen but an offensive whirlwind, shredding the unstable crystal constructs. The ash, infused with the ambient energy of the Bankai, seemed to possess a life of its own, eagerly seeking out the sterile order of the enemy and dismantling it. Harribel stood like a queen of the tides. She didn't need to gather Seros from her allies anymore. The very air was thick with usable power. She summoned tsunamis of spiritual water that crashed through the enemy ranks, the chaotic, unpredictable nature of the waves a perfect weapon against the gods' rigid creations. They fought with a desperate, beautiful synergy. Three aspects of a storm protecting the eye of their hurricane. They, more than anyone, could feel the immense, crushing strain Naruto was under. They could feel his will, his very life force, being hourred into maintaining this pocket of reality against the pressure of a god. He was a dam holding back an ocean of oblivion, and they could see the cracks beginning to form. On Sokyoku Hill, Naruto's vision was starting to blur. Blood trickled from his nose, a physical manifestation of the spiritual exertion. The 9 golden tails of his Bankai, the pillars of his created world, were beginning to flicker. He was feeding his own soul into the battlefield, and the cost was immense. He looked across the swirling chaos he had wrought and saw his army pushing back the tide. He saw Grimjow cackling, as he shattered a guardian with his bare hands. He saw Byakuya's cherry blossoms dance with a lethal grace they had never before possessed. They were winning the battle. But Naruto knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was losing the war. He could not maintain this forever. Eventually, his energy would fail, the Bankai would collapse, and the assimilation wave would wash over them all, unopposed. Fighting the gods' manifestations was like fighting the tide by bailing out the ocean with a bucket. He couldn't defeat it from the outside. He had to go to the source. Go to the source, a voice echoed in his head. It was not the gentle, insidious whisper of the god. It was a gruff, familiar growl, a feral rumble that was the very soul of his Zanpakuto. The heart, the core, the place where the thought is born. You cannot destroy the storm, Kit. You must become its eye. He knew what he had to do. It was the most insane, reckless gamble of his life, and that was saying something. Yoruichi, Rangiku, Harribel, his voice projected into their minds, a command laced with desperation and absolute trust. I'm going in. I need an opening. A big one. The 3 of them received the message simultaneously. They didn't need to ask what it meant. They understood. They turned their gazes from their individual battles toward the sky, toward the massive, cracked dome of the Seraite from which the assimilation wave poured. They had to punch a hole through a god. They converged, their movements synchronized. I'll go first, Yoruichi roared, her voice a crackle of thunder. Clear a path. She gathered all the lightning of her Shunko, all the impossible speed of her Thundercat form, into a single, focused point. She became not a creature, but a projectile. A living thunderbolt. She shot upwards, a golden streak against the swirling sky of the Bankai, aiming for the very apex of the assimilation wave. The guardians below sensed the threat and coalesced, forming a massive, crystalline H. And that reached up to swat her out of the sky. Oh no, you don't. Rangiku yelled. She directed her entire ash storm upwards, a massive, swirling vortex that engulfed the crystalline hand. The structure was shredded from the outside, its orderly form unable to withstand the chaotic assault. The path was clear. Yoruichi struck the wave. Her impact was not an explosion but a piercing. For a single, brilliant moment, a hole of pure, chaotic lightning was torn in the placid white curtain of the god's power. Now, Harribel, Rangiku screamed. Harribel raised her shark-toothed sword. She drew upon every ounce of power within Naruto's Bankai, the swirling reishi of the battlefield condensing into a single point on the tip of her blade. It was not water. It was pure, pressurized spiritual energy. Her viendo, a beam of impossibly hot, high-pressure energy, so intense it vaporized the air around it, shot from her sword. It was a lance, a drill, aimed directly at the hole Yoruichi had created. The beam struck, widening the tear, forcing it open, a violent intrusion into the god's serene perfection. This was the opening. On the hill, Naruto gathered his remaining power. He looked at his allies, his friends, his family. Holding the line below, a fierce, protective love washed over him, drowning out the pain and exhaustion. I'm counting on you, he whispered. His 9 tails coiled behind him, and then launched him upwards like a cannonball. He was a golden comet, streaking through the chaos of his own Bankai, through the opening his wives had torn for him. He passed through the assimilation wave. The sensation was indescribable. It was like diving into an ocean of pure thought. A billion voices, all the souls from District 32, washed over him, whispering of peace, of release. He felt his own individuality, his memories, his very name, begin to dissolve, smoothed over by the serene, orderly pressure. But at his core was a fire, a chaotic, untamable spark that refused to be extinguished. It was the legacy of the 9-tailed fox, the stubborn will of Naruto Uzumaki, and the love he felt for the people he had left behind. He clung to it, using it as a shield as he pushed deeper, not through space, but through consciousness. He broke through into a new reality. He was floating in a void of perfect, luminous white. It was infinite, silent, and utterly calm. There was no up or down, no beginning or end. This was the conceptual realm of the god, the heart of the maelstrom, the source of the assimilation. And before him floated a single figure. It was not a monster. It was not a terrifying deity. It was a child, androgynous and beautiful, with eyes that held the serene, sorrowful wisdom of a billion years. Its form was made of the same soft, crystalline light as the assimilation wave. It looked at Naruto not with anger, but with a profound, gentle pity. "You have come," its voice echoed, not in his mind, but in the very fabric of this place. "The final child of chaos. You struggle so hard. Why?" "Because struggle is what gives life meaning," Naruto replied, his own voice sounding small and loud in the perfect silence. "It is the source of all pain," the child god countered. It gestured, and the white void around them changed. They were standing in the ruins of Konoha, after Pain's assault. He saw the bodies of his friends, his teachers. He felt the crushing grief, the rage, the despair. This is the legacy of choice, of conflict, of individuality. I offer an end to this. A world where no one must ever feel this pain again. The scene shifted. He was back in the Rukongai, kneeling over the bodies of the Squad 2 members killed by the Hollow. He felt the weight of his responsibility, the sting of his failure to protect them. "This is the burden of a leader," the god whispered. "I can take this burden from you. From everyone. In my world, everyone is protected. Everyone is safe. No one ever dies alone." The temptation was immense. A part of Naruto, the part that had seen too much war, too much loss, screamed for him to accept. A world without pain. It was the very thing he had always fought to create. "What's the price?" Naruto asked, his voice shaking but firm. "There is no price," the god said gently. "Only a release." "You're lying," Naruto said, pushing the visions away, focusing on the child's serene face. "The price is everything. It's the taste of ramen. It's the thrill of a good fight. It's the feeling of Yoruichi's hand in mine. It's the sound of Rangiku's laughter." The void shifted again. He was standing in the moonlit garden. He saw Yoruichi, Rangiku, and Harribel, their faces filled with love and defiance. He felt the memory of his vow, not as a distant echo, but as a living, burning fire in his chest. "You see pain and loss as a flaw in the system," Naruto said, his voice gaining strength, his own chaotic, golden aura beginning to pulse around him even in this conceptual realm. "But you're wrong. They're part of it. The pain of loss is what makes the joy of companionship so precious. The bitterness of defeat is what makes victory so sweet. It's the struggle, the choices, the imperfections. That's what it means to be alive. A perfect world isn't a paradise. It's a cage." Quote, his love for them, for Yoruichi's fierce pride, for Rangiku's hidden strength, for Harribel's quiet loyalty, became his anchor, his ultimate argument. It was a chaotic, messy, and imperfect love. And it was more real and more powerful than the god's sterile, perfect peace. The child god looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than serene pity appeared in its ancient eyes. It was confusion. It could not comprehend. "You would choose to suffer. I would choose to live," Naruto declared. "And I'll choose it for them, too." He would not, could not, destroy this being. It wasn't truly evil. It was just incomplete. It only understood half of the equation of existence. So he wouldn't kill it. He would teach it. His 9 tails erupted behind him, no longer just energy, but conduits. He reached out, not to strike, but to embrace the child god. "If you won't understand my world," Naruto roared, his golden aura exploding outwards, "then you're going to have to experience it." He grabbed hold of the god. The battle for the soul society was over. The battle for the soul of a god had just begun. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The dawn after the storm. The embrace was not one of affection, but of invasion. As Naruto's hands closed around the luminous form of the child god, he did not crush it or attack it. He opened a floodgate. He poured his very soul, his entire history, into the pristine, orderly consciousness of the entity. It was an assault of pure, unadulterated life. The god, who had only ever known the serene logic of absolute order, was suddenly drowning in a chaotic, contradictory torrent of sensation and memory. It felt the rough scrape of a tree's bark against a child's knee. It tasted the salty, savory broth of Ichiraku ramen, a flavor so complex and perfect in its imperfection that the god's mind reeled. It felt the sting of a training ground spar with Kakashi, the sharp pain followed by the warm satisfaction of a lesson learned. It experienced the crushing loneliness of a pariah, the burning shame of being ostracized, and then the explosive, world-altering joy of being acknowledged for the first time by Iruka. The entity, which had offered to erase all pain, was suddenly forced to understand that the pain was the price of that joy, the shadow that gave it shape. Naruto showed it everything: the fierce rivalry with Sasuke, a bond of love and hatred so intertwined it was a symphony of chaos. The goofy, light-hearted camaraderie of Team 7. The grief of Jiraiya's death, a gaping wound that never truly healed, but which became a source of profound strength. The roar of a crowd cheering his name. The quiet, profound love he felt watching his friends build families of their own. And then, he showed it them. He flooded the god's mind with the memory of Yoruichi's laughter, a sound like gravel and silk that could shatter any silence. He made it feel the thrill of their high-speed spars, the absolute trust of fighting back to back. He poured in the memory of her hand in his on a quiet rooftop, a simple touch that grounded him more than any law or title. He deluged it with Rangiku's spirit, her feigned laziness that hid a razor-sharp mind, the way her smile could light up a room, and the deep, hidden well of sorrow she carried for a past she rarely spoke of. He made the god feel the fierce, protective warmth that bloomed in his chest when he defended her, and the giddy, simple happiness of sharing a bottle of sake with her after a long day. He showed it Harribel, the cold, hard pragmatism of Hawako Mundo, the fierce, silent loyalty she commanded. He made it understand the weight of a queen's duty, the burning desire to protect one's own people against a hostile universe. He shared the profound respect he felt for her strength, and the quiet, powerful connection forged not in banter or passion, but in a shared, unspoken understanding. He was not just sharing memories. He was feeding the god the very concept of love, chaotic, illogical, painful, beautiful, and utterly, defiantly alive. The child god's serene face twisted, not in pain, but in sheer, overwhelming confusion. Its perfect, orderly reality was being corrupted by paradox. How could grief be a source of strength? How could rivalry be a form of love? How could one soul feel so many contradictory things for three different beings at the same time? Its pristine white void began to corrupt. Splashes of vibrant, messy color bled into the landscape. The perfect silence was broken by a cacophony of laughter, cheers, battle cries, and whispered confessions. This is illogical, the god's voice stammered, no longer a unified chorus but a fractured, dissonant chord. It is chaos. It is suffering. It's life, Naruto said, his own consciousness fading, his last ounce of strength poured into this final, desperate lesson. And it's worth fighting for. Life, the god echoed, as a final memory, a vision of four people sitting around a table sharing tea, filled its mind. It is beautiful. And then, the light, the voice, the presence, simply faded. Not destroyed, but changed. Subdued. It retreated, ulling back from the world not in defeat, but in a state of profound, overwhelming contemplation. On the battlefield, the effect was instantaneous and absolute. The assimilation wave, the descending curtain of white light, simply evaporated. It dissolved into a harmless, glittering dust that rained down on the Seraite. The crystalline structures that had consumed the outer districts and fought the allied army shattered. Their orderly forms no longer supported by the god's focused will. They crumbled into fine, white sand that was swept away by the wind. The cracked sky healed, the jagged WHITE lines vanishing as the serene blue reasserted itself. The oppressive, pacifying pressure that had weighed on every soul was gone, leaving behind an air so clean and light it felt like the first breath after a lifetime underwater. Naruto's Bankai, its purpose served, collapsed. The golden dome of chaotic energy faded, and he fell from the sky, a limp, unconscious form, his spiritual energy utterly and completely depleted. He didn't fall far. Three blurred figures shot up to meet him. Yoruichi, back in her human form, caught him in her arms. Rangiku and Harribel were right beside her, their hands supporting him. Their faces a mask of terror and relief. They landed gently on the scarred earth of Sokyoku Hill, a silent, exhausted trinity around their fallen anchor. The war was over. Weeks later, the Seraite was a city of scaffolding and hammering. The physical damage was immense, but the spirit of the city was not broken. It was being rebuilt, not just with wood and stone, but with a new sense of purpose. The political landscape had been irrevocably altered. The Central 46, exposed as an impotent, dogmatic relic in the face of a true crisis, was quietly and unceremoniously dissolved. In its place, under the guidance of Captain Commander Kiraku, a new council was formed. It was smaller, more dynamic, and comprised of the captains who had proven their pragmatism, with advisor wise seats granted to Shinji Hiroko of the Visored Zen, in a move that shocked the foundations of the old noble houses, Tear Harribel as the official representative from Hueco Mundo. The alliance, forged in desperation, was now a formal treaty. Grimjow, having had the fight he'd always craved, returned to the White Desert with his followers, not as an enemy, but as a rival power, content to rule his own brutal kingdom. But bound by a pact of mutual defense. The old enmities were not forgotten, but they were now overshadowed by a shared, hard-won respect. Naruto's recovery was slow. He had poured nearly all of his spiritual essence into changing the god, an act that had left him weaker than he had been since he was a child. For the first week, he could barely sit up. But he was never alone. His quarters in the Squad 11 barracks became the unofficial heart of the new Seraite. His 3 wives nursed him with a fierce, unwavering devotion. Yoruichi handled the political maneuvering, using her noble connections and sharp intellect to shield him from the administrative fallout. Rangiku managed the day-to-day, her cheerful presence a balm to the weary souls of the rebuilding squads. Harribel, in her new diplomatic role, was a silent, formidable guardian, her very presence a statement that Naruto Uzumaki was under the protection of not one world, but 2. On a warm afternoon, a month after the siege, Naruto sat on the Ingawa, the wooden veranda overlooking his private garden. He wore simple, loose robes, the white haori of his office folded neatly inside. He was watching Akaku and Da few of Grimjow's Arankar in a friendly, but nonetheless brutal sparring match in the main training yard. The sounds of their clashes and insults were a comforting, familiar music. The shoji door slid open behind him. Rangiku entered, carrying a tray with a steaming teapot and 4 cups. She set it down and sat beside him, her shoulder pressing comfortably against his. "Pushing yourself again?" she asked, her voice soft. "You should be resting." "I'm tired of resting," he admitted. "And I like the view." Another figure dropped from the roof above, landing silently on the veranda. Yoruichi stretched, lithe and graceful as the cat she could become. "Just came from the council meeting. Byakuya is arguing with Shinji about the new uniform regulations. It's painfully boring. I much prefer the chaos of a world-ending invasion." She flopped down on his other side, draping an arm casually over his shoulders. A moment later, Harribel emerged from the house, her expression as serene as ever. She held a small, finely crafted wooden box. She sat opposite them, a silent, calming presence that balanced the more volatile energies of the other 2. "A gift," she said, her voice a low murmur. She pushed the box across the table. "From the artisans of Las Noches. As thanks." Naruto opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a new cross guard for his Zanpakuto. It was forged from the strange, crystalline metal of Hueco Mundo, and etched into its surface were 4 intertwined figures, a 9-tailed fox, a thunder cat, a lioness, and a shark. He looked at her, his throat tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "Harribel, thank you." She simply nodded, a universe of meaning passing in that small gesture. They sat there for a long time, drinking tea, watching the sparring, and simply existing in the quiet peace they had fought so hard to create. The great, cosmic struggle was over. The political machinations were someone else's problem for the day. All that was left was this small, perfect moment. "So," Yoruichi said, breaking the comfortable silence as she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Now that you've dethroned a god and broken the government, what are you going to do for an encore?" Naruto looked at the faces of the women around him. He saw Yoruichi's challenging, loving smirk. He saw Rangiku's warm, radiant smile. He saw Harribel's quiet, steady gaze. He felt the weight of their presence, not as a burden, but as the anchors of his entire world. A genuine, easy smile spread across his face, free from the weight of command or the strain of battle. "I think," he said, reaching out to place his hand over Rangiku's, while his other arm held Yoruichi close, his eyes meeting Harribel's in a look of shared understanding. "I'm just going to be home." The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden and bathing the four of them in a warm, golden light. The sounds of rebuilding faded into a distant hum. The war was over. The world was safe. And here, in the heart of it all, a new day was dawning. Chapter 10 End.